Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Became the Apex Predator of UA? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Something Izuku had learned, the very hard way, was that there would always be someone who tried to put their boot on his throat. He lived for years in fear of doing or saying something that would set Bakugo off, after all. Deep down, he didn't really hate the other boy, but he would have appreciated an apology, or something. But instead, the boy just screamed something mostly coherent at him after the sludge villain incident and then proceeded to avoid him. Yeah, real heartfelt. There was something that felt a little different in their dynamic after that. Still, Bakugo had always been that someone. A lion stalking its prey and playing with its food. An apex predator. Izuku liked to think he had an upbeat view on life and didn't hold a grudge, even if he did have some journals left from when he was younger that mentioned ripping Kaken's legs off and sending him spiders in the mail. But he was still realistic. Just because he'd gotten into UE didn't mean he would escape the hell that middle school had been. After all, he was sure there were people like Bakugo there. Now, Bakugo, he hadn't been the apex predator on purpose. Sure, he bullied on purpose, but he didn't even fully realize the power he wielded. He just had an ego, he was just on top because of his quirk. He didn't go out of his way to prey on everyone in their school, well, other than when he spotted Izuku and harassed him. Izuku heard stories from his friends online, the ones he played games and had a server for their multiplayer online games with, and the stories were always the same. Bullies were everywhere. And sure, heroes were great, Izuku loved heroes. But he also wasn't stupid. There were a lot of heroes, too many, that were bullies. Not all heroes were good people like All Might or went out of their way to create programs to help their communities like Ingenium or donated most of their pay to charity like Present Mike. A school like UE, even with its shining reputation, surely had bullies. Surely had an apex predator. And it was probably someone who was smart about it, since they'd gotten into UE. That meant Izuku would have to spot them first. He would have to act first, to protect himself and avoid them, to make sure high school wasn't as terrible as middle school was, and make sure Kaken didn't get into a fight with any bullies and accidentally blow them up. Or get blown up himself. There might be someone with a better explosion quirk out there. It wasn't something he told anyone about or talked about. Why would he? It would only spread, slowly, and draw attention to him, because people let little things slip accidentally even if they didn't mean to. But from the first day, he was making mental notes and cataloging his new classmates' personalities and abilities. He would mark one Ida Tenya down as authoritarian hostile, to later change it to a good friend in his book. He took stock of the friendly girl he'd saved in the entrance exam who caught him, much to his embarrassment, and thought she might be a good friend. He was actually thrilled that their teacher decided to do a quirk test first. Well, that was bad for him, but good for analyzing everyone else, and it allowed him to get a look at what everyone could do. On that note, he wasn't too sure about Aizawa-sensei at first. The man did kind of intimidate him in front of everyone, but he got the point of it after. It would be pretty stupid if he broke his arms every single time he tried to help someone. He would never survive. And the man was probably operating under the assumption Izuku had had his quirk for almost 11 years, so he hadn't bothered learning to control it. And he did stop Bakugo from running at him. No one had ever done that before. Izuku did make a small mental note that maybe his homeroom teacher wouldn't turn out to be too bad. Maybe. Izuku would keep an eye on him. His notebooks simply wouldn't cut it. Not for the entire school. He did keep one select notebook for Class 1A, but delegated the rest of the hero courses to a binder, and the same for support and general studies. He'd started a habit of skulking around during lunch, going unnoticed as usual, because he was very good at that after going through middle school with Kaken, taking note of the loudest people and anyone who looked aggressive or people avoided. He ended up seeing some fairly interesting personalities, but nothing too bad yet. But he was sure he'd find something. There was always a king, a ringleader, a queen bee, an apex predator. Izuku had made a few pretty good friends so far, and he wouldn't let their years at UE be ruined by anyone, not while he was around. Midoriya, stay a minute. I just have a note on your essay. Izuku looked up in surprise but stayed at his desk while his classmates filed out around him, not looking particularly concerned. A note on his essay was probably to be expected. It was 10 pages longer than their assigned page limit. He couldn't help it. Aizawa had given them such a broad topic about hero society, Izuku couldn't just shave off so much vital information. When the door slid shut, Aizawa stepped out from behind his podium, pinched his nose, and sighed, closing his eyes like he was dreading what he was about to say. Izuku suddenly wondered if this was about more than his essay. The man walked over to his desk, then, unexpectedly, dropped into a crouch so he could look him in the eyes. Izuku couldn't help but stiffen, which he was sure the teacher noticed, and he wondered again what this was about. "I don't have a note on your essay," Aizawa told him, bluntly, and Izuku had to give him points for honesty. His usual dead-looking eyes bore into his with a flat intensity. "I just didn't want you to panic. You aren't in trouble. I reviewed the footage from battle training the other day. You handled Bakugo's quirk quite cleverly." Cleverly meant that Izuku knew exactly how to push Kaken's buttons, and had baited him into wasting time while Izuku ran away from him, something he had way too much experience in, and then tricked him into blowing up the ceiling to destabilize the floor so Uraraka could get the fake bomb. From what he'd heard, Ochako had been just as clever in getting Tenya to let his guard down. The cute pink costume shouldn't be underestimated, in Izuku's opinion. The girl was smart. "I want to know why you didn't use yours." Izuku cringed. "There was. Because it breaks my bones?" he offered, a little pathetically, garnering only Aizawa's unimpressed gaze. "Well, I'm not that very used to it yet, sensei, so." Aizawa's eyes narrowed. "You aren't used to it? Didn't you develop it any before entering Yui?" Really? I'm, a late bloomer, you see, so I didn't get it when I was 4, like you usually do." Izuku got more uncomfortable when Aizawa tilted his head, like he was examining him. "All right, so you got it at what, 8? 9? Did you do any training?" "No, sensei." Struggling not to grab at his neck, where it felt like bugs were crawling up his back, he hadn't talked to a teacher this long in, well, forever. Izuku tried not to mumble out his next words. "I got it this year." Aizawa froze. His eyes widened, which was a testament to how surprised he must have been. He didn't seem like someone who would be surprised easily. "This year? When exactly?" "At entrance exam day." Izuku cringed when Aizawa's eyes widened further. He was trying so hard not to tell the whole truth, but not to lie either, but there was no easy way around this. "Excuse me?" the man demanded, like he was personally offended. "You got it that late?" I know it's rare, but there are actually 3 documented cases. Izuku immediately started to stammer. Aizawa held up a hand, silencing him. He raised his other hand to rub at his eyes. "For FS sake," he mumbled under his breath, then seemed to remember a freshman was in front of him and looked up with a sigh. "Midoriya, I apologize. I assumed you neglected training your quirk until so late out of either naivety or arrogance, an assumption that made less and less sense every day I've spent with you, which is why I decided to ask you this." Izuku stared at him in frozen amazement. A teacher apologizing to him? When he hadn't even really done anything that extreme. The entrance exam is unfairly stilted towards those with strength and combat-oriented quirks, even though there are plenty of heroes without such quirks, such as myself. With yours, you would have seen just that privilege if you had actually a chance to learn to use it. Izuku tried to connect the dots in his head. What did this mean then? Now that Aizawa knew he was such aide at New B? So am I gonna be expelled? He forced himself to ask, wincing. Aizawa frowned. "Of course not," he replied, noting the way his student flinched when he moved his hand to rest on the desk. "But I will have to alter how I teach you. I'm not going to be removed from class, right?" Always assumes the worst, but especially if it's from me, Aizawa thought to himself. He may not have been as experienced with kids as Hizashi or Namuri, but he wasn't dumb. He made a note that he would need to be careful in how he spoke and moved. Midoriya seemed excessively nervous of authority figures, which could have been just an offshoot of his regular anxiety, but could have darker origins than he knew. "No. I'll just need to make a schedule to spar with you one-on-one. Your quirk is obviously dependent on the strength of your body, and we can discuss it in further detail later. The boy visibly deflated in relief. Seriously, what was his deal? Ah, really, sensei? He smiled, almost hesitantly. I mean, you don't have to dash. I don't have to, but I'm going to, Aizawa interrupted dryly. I'm your teacher, Midoriya. It's my job to monitor your progress and help you. I meant it when I said you have potential, and I'll do everything I can to help you reach that potential. Midoriya's jaw clicked shut. He looked like he was about to start crying for a moment, then smiled again, wider and yet more like glass. Thanks, sensei. I promise I'll give it my all. I don't doubt that. Just don't give it your all so much you break more bones. Izuku had a sheet dedicated to the teachers, separate from their individual pages, of course. This one had a 5-star ranking system for how trustworthy he thought they would be. Obviously, All Might had a star beside his name. No one else had any stars yet, partially due to the fact he hadn't gotten to know them yet, partially because some of them kind of scared the shit out of him. Did Snipe ever take his mask off? That night, however, he went home and hesitantly stared at the page for a few minutes before scribbling in a star by Aizawa's name. He had always dreamed of getting to meet Eraserhead, though he was also a little afraid of what the man would be like in person, but maybe that he would be trustworthy. Maybe he would even listen if Izuku told him about any bullies. Izuku! Ochako cried the next day, after he told her he didn't actually like the name Deku that much, even if she had given a new meaning to it, and Izuku had suggested they just use each other's first names for now. I love your hairpin. Izuku smiled, embarrassed. His hair was particularly crazy that day, and some strands had stubbornly refused to stop flopping in front of his face, and he'd known it would be a problem in class, so he'd used one of his mother's hair clips to hold it back. It was in the shape of a pretty pink lily like the ones Inko kept in their windowsill in the living room. Thanks, Ochako, he replied, still getting used to using her name. It's actually my mom's, but, that's nothing to be embarrassed about, my friend. Tenya practically yelled into his ear, waving an arm enthusiastically. I think it rather suits you. It matches I mean to say, Ochako's hair tie. Ochako giggled. It does, she said, looping an arm through Izuku's, making him jump and gulp, face warming. She quickened their pace. Come on, let's hustle before we're late. Izuku wondered if this was what having friends was like, as they dragged him through the hall towards class. If it was rather nice, and it made him even more determined to make sure no bullies made his friends unhappy. Izuku had gained a lot of online friends through the games he picked. It was too simple to say, however, that he found others with useful skills just through games. He would inevitably start up conversations and enter servers with others and talk about everything from quirks to who had the best Cinnabons in town. As he hashed his way through the internet, he inevitably came across a few people who hacked their way instead. It wasn't always necessarily illegal activities. Some of his friends just used their skills to get better at their games. But still, he knew someone who could crack open a database or two. She went by the online name of Plastic Bitch 2. Izuku didn't really quite understand the origin of that name, but it was very easy to remember, and she liked him. Apparently she was older, in a gap year before college, and thought he was a cute little munchkin, and hunted down pretty much everything he asked for. She did say he asked for pretty weird things, but did it anyway. Still, he felt bad calling her anything with beach in it, so she said he could use Hannah as a nickname. Can you get me any middle school files for these students? Sure. You stalking anyone? No, just making sure they aren't bullies. Fair enough. Can you look into someone for me? Always do, winky face. Can you just say what it is, munchkin kid? She was busy, though, so she taught him the tools of the trade herself. He would need it for when she wasn't around. That I'll just give up, he reject. A voice said as Izuku approached the main gates, which made his ears perk up. Narrowing his eyes, he skulked closer and hesitated near the wall, slowly peering around. Whatever, a purple-haired boy spat, like he'd had to repeat it several times, trying to shoulder his way past two taller boys. Just buzz off. I'm busy. Busy trying and failing to become a hero? One of the other two asked mockingly. You're never getting in. You might as well give up. Yeah, with a quirk like that, you'd be a better villain. Izuku felt a rush of pure, unadulterated anger. He couldn't count the number of times boys had cornered him just like that and mocked him relentlessly for his dream. For even trying. What right did they have? Even if they were better in some ways, that didn't mean they had the right to trample on others' dreams. He whipped around the corner and stormed towards them, combing through the extensive archive that was his brain by now. Hey, you two, he began in a sweet voice, his current intense rage distracting him enough to make him forget his own hesitancy and tendency to stammer. He had never been good at standing up for himself, but when it came to other people, he had a protective streak a mile wide. Oniwara Koji and Kudo Takeo, right? The two second years paused and glanced at each other, undoubtedly confused as to how he knew their names, especially since he was obviously a tiny first year. Yeah, what of it dash? The one called Koji, the one who'd said the boy should be a villain, began. I don't think you two have any space to go around telling people who should and shouldn't be a hero, or talking about villainous behavior. It wouldn't be very nice if I took this to the principal, would it? After all, that's what villains do, bully people. You wouldn't want to be bullies, would you? Not after that incident with Moriya-san in your second year of middle school at Taku Academy. That was such a shame, how you humiliated her in front of her whole class but only got off with a slap on the wrist. But Principal Nedzu would surely be interested in that, wouldn't he? He is supposed to foster the next generation of heroes, people who prevent such things. By now, both were staring at him, incredibly pale, and who wouldn't? He had just come out of nowhere, he knew their names, and he knew a secret they thought no one would. He probably looked like a stalker. And since we're outside school property, in public, I'm allowed to wear my body camera, for personal safety, you see, so it's currently recording everything, including what I just saw. That's the thing about bullying people out in public where anyone could see. Maybe you're thinking, well, if we beat him up and teach him a lesson and break the camera, he won't do anything, right? Wrong. His smile got incredibly wider, making Takeo take a hesitant step back. It uploads to my computer every 30 seconds, so not only would I have this footage, I would have footage of you two assaulting me, and the only way I wouldn't say anything would be if you killed me. Are either of you willing to kill me? He looked up into Koji's eyes with a dead, haunting look in his. The older boy swallowed heavily, stammering, and slowly shook his head. And no. Then I suggest, Izuku replied lightly, that you go home, forget this happened, and don't bully anyone again, because I keep very detailed notes on things like this. I know your names. I know your faces. I even know your quirks, and I'll always have this footage. So run along, yeah? Takeo and Koji gave each other a frightened, hesitant glance. Izuku stomped his foot, impatient, and the two scattered, taking off down the street like the devil himself was on their heels. Sticks and stones could break bones, but words could do much worse. Izuku knew that better than anyone. Izuku watched them go, making sure they were out of sight, and then he remembered the boy he'd come to defend in the first place. He turned, and found said boy staring at him, eyes as wide as dinner plates, looking shell-shocked. It broke him out of his anger as suddenly as if he'd been slapped with a fish. Oh, I'm so sorry, he stuttered, embarrassed at himself. I didn't even ask your name. I'm so sorry that happened. It's terrible that bullies can get into even Yui. Are you okay? Did they hit you or anything? I can walk you to Recovery Girl dash. I'm fine, the boy interrupted him, and Izuku flushed at his rambling. I'm not fine, man. How did you f-ing.do that? Do what? You just scared them off, and all you did was talk, the boy told him, looking perturbed. How'd you even know all of that? I know lots of things about everyone who goes here, Izuku replied, vaguely, which made the other blink in confusion. Speaking of, I recognize you. Aren't you the boy in general studies with the brainwashing quirk? He asked excitedly, starting to bounce up and down like an overeager puppy. Oh, that's so cool. Do you think you'd be willing to answer some questions sometime? Oh, I love voice-based quirks. They're so interesting. Like, does it work if people hear a recording of you? Does it have to be face-to-face? And how extensive of an action can you command? Oh, I'm ranting again, sorry. He started to backpedal, realizing he was going to be late, and plastered on a bright grin. You're trying to get into the hero course, right? I gotta get home, but he broke into a sprint, worried he would miss his train, and called over his shoulder. Good luck. I know you can do it. The boy stood there staring after him, jaw hanging a bit in the wind, looking slightly more awake than usual. He had barely been able to keep up, let alone get in a word edgewise. What's your name? Training with Aizawa turned out to be more fun than Izuku had expected. It was training, he hadn't gone into it expecting fun. But it was getting to spend more time with his teacher and learn new things. And it wasn't all that excruciating, since they only sparred on the shock-absorbent pads that lessened the impact of any blows. Otherwise, Aizawa had him run on the obstacle courses in the gyms, though he was always nearby in case he had to catch him with his capture weapon. Izuku found that he really enjoyed rock climbing. It exercised a lot of useful areas of the body for one, but it was also just fun, though he had no idea how to swim, so that was something Aizawa had to teach him from the ground up. His quirk, however, was still a bit of a conundrum to them. Aizawa stared at his hand as they sat on one of the mats, looking pensive. You still can't manage an energy flow without it exploding? He asked, slightly rhetorically, making Izuku wince. No, he admitted, feeling embarrassed at his own lack of progress. He didn't know why it was so difficult. Did it mean that he really was just not suited for one for all? Aizawa rubbed the back of his head as he sat there, staring so intently it was starting to make Izuku feel on edge. What's the most you can do before it starts to hurt? Maybe heat my hand up? But it's just so much energy, it's like I'm trying to shove it all through a thimble. Aizawa hummed again, then frowned before standing up and nodding towards the door. Follow me. Izuku scrambled up and trotted after him. Even though it was after hours, Aizawa seemed fully confident someone would still be wherever they were going, as they headed back inside the school and past their classroom. They came to a room that looked vaguely familiar. Izuku was sure he'd passed it a few times, and he slid the door open, pausing for a moment to check things out before walking in. That was probably a good idea. It was the support workshop, and Izuku had gathered that random explosions tended to happen at odd times. Hey, Aizawa, called out Power Loader, who sat at a workbench working on something with a screwdriver. What brings you by? I have a student who needs support items, Aizawa said, stopping at the other end of the bench. His expression was rather dry, but that might have been because it had been an hour since he'd used his eye drops. The man was remarkably forgetful about his own regimen. We just don't know what kind. A loud bang startled Izuku into jumping. A whirl of motion came running at them from a corner of the workshop, and a few pieces of metal went flying as a girl came to a stop, adjusting her goggles with an insane grin. She had bright pink hair that he'd seen before, and also matched his hair clip. Hatsum Mei, if he wasn't mistaken. Did I hear support item mystery? She practically screamed, thrumming with excitement. Power Loader, can I help? Please? 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 Okay, Power Loader yelled over her, groaning. Fine. What's the sitch, Eraser? The kid's quirk works like an energy source. The problem is there's too much of it to be used effectively. He can't channel any of it without breaking his bones. Energy conductors. Hatsum yelled, then wheeled over to Izuku, making him yelp. I'm gonna need sample data, is that okay? Can you try and channel it for me? I'll have to get some readings and also measure you. Izuku said, while she pulled on one of his arms and took out a measuring tape from nowhere. And nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. The name's Hatsum Mei, and you are going to be great advertising for my babies. Babies? My babies. My beloved little creations. I'll be able to whip a prototype up and get to work as soon as I can see you in action. That will require Recovery Girl's presence, Aizawa interjected flatly. As I said, his quirk breaks his bones. Well, that's inconvenient, noted Power Loader from his place at the table. And it limits the tests we can run. But I'm sure we can come up with something. Izuku didn't break his arm, but he did kind of fry it, which was pretty painful, and made Recovery Girl shake her head with a sigh after he'd done his best to channel his quirk and break the target Power Loader had set up. It made him feel pretty down, the fact that he couldn't even use it, and he slunk back over to where the others were standing, hoping he didn't look as despondent as he felt. Aizawa set a hand on his head and ruffled his hair. Then he looked over to Hatsum. Izuku figured she must have been insanely smart if even the teachers were taking her opinions so seriously. You get anything useful? 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 Oh, I got something useful, the girl cried, cackling. That quirk is amazing. The energy reading I got was off the charts. No wonder you can't use it, Izuku. The amount of power in your body could probably break your whole body. She said that rather cheerfully, but it made him wince, and Aizawa frown. Maybe this is one reason your quirk came in so late, Power Loader said, looking up from a tablet in his hands. It could have been unconscious self-preservation. I can't imagine a 4-year-old surviving this kind of quirk. Is it really so dangerous? Aizawa questioned, frown still on his lips, having moved his hands to stuff them into his pockets. Izuku couldn't quite decipher his expression. Was he mad? Disappointed? Wary? Well, it is right now, Hatsum continued, just as cheerily. But when you get older, I'm sure your body will be able to conduct more of it safely. But for now, I can make you some babies that will help use a little, I'd say about 1%. Aizawa and Izuku stared at her, stunned. I'm thinking arm braces and contact points down your legs to help conduct it through your entire body. My entire body? Izuku parroted. Well, yeah. Part of the problem is even just a little is way too much for just one part of your body. But if you try and spread it out over your entire body, it should take some of the strain off. Comprend? She wagged a finger back and forth in front of his face, grinning, and he hesitantly nodded. I'd guess? To thank you for, all your help dash. Oh, you don't have to thank me. You'll thank me by showing off my amazing babies on live television. What dash? Izuku's new costume was pumped out with alarming speed. If it was made by anyone else other than Power Loader and that insane girl, he would have questioned the quality, but he could tell it was going to work as soon as he activated One for All. The arm braces ran all the way up to his biceps, then connected to a thin, unobtrusive brace that sat on his collarbone, almost like a necklace, that ran a flexible line down to a belt that was connected to a special pair of boots. He called on his quirk and focused on trying to spread it through his whole body, like she'd suggested, and felt something else tugging it along, helping him do it without exploding parts of himself, almost guiding and taking some of the power along. Rather than trying to punch something, he took a running start for one of the climbing walls, and then he was on top of the wall, almost falling over. The sound that came out of his mouth was embarrassing. He flailed his arms, falling on his butt, and let One for All fade away, and with it, the green lightning that had been crackling around his body. He turned and looked for Aizawa-sensei, completely confused, and found the man staring up at him from the start point with a stopwatch in hand that he hadn't even gotten the chance to start. He was staring up at him with a slightly agape jaw, which mirrored how Izuku felt. "That was that good?" he called down, trying not to sound too hopeful. He knew May was going to want an update later. It may or may not have been a mistake to give her his phone number. "You did good today." Izuku jumped and whipped his head around, a smile falling on his lips when he realized Aizawa was in fact speaking to him. There was no one else in the gym. "Really?" he asked, and it made Aizawa narrow his eyes at him. At least that didn't make Izuku feel uncomfortable anymore, because the man did it a lot. He second-guesses any praise he gets. Did he get every shitty teacher out there? "Don't get discouraged by the fact you're only using 1%, Aizawa said, strolling over and taking a seat on the bench where his student was taking off the boots to his costume. "If that power source is really so gigantic, I'm impressed by the fact you haven't truly blown a limb off yet." Izuku let out an uneven laugh. Yeah." Aizawa stared at him for a moment. He hadn't had high expectations for this year's class, but he had to admit he had been pleasantly surprised. Especially, however, by Midoriya. The boy had 10 years' worth of training to catch up on, and he'd managed to not break any bones yet. After a few days, he'd managed to, for the most part, achieve what he called full cowling with a good success rate, though they were still working on his landing strategies. It wasn't quite the physical success that Aizawa was impressed by, however. The student was someone who actually truly embodied what the school waxed poetic about every semester. There were plenty of students who had the raw talent, or the raw power, or the physical ability, but lacked the drive. Midoriya was fully willing to just work, and he had to work harder than any of his peers just to catch up, and yet keep up at the same time, and he did so without complaining. He was serious about wanting to be a hero. He wasn't there to play around or just have fun. God, he wasn't good at this part. Hisashi was, Nemuri was. But Shoyuta just wasn't good at what Hisashi called mushy feelings time. You really are doing well, Midoriya. You drew an unlucky lot, but I'm proud of your progress. There, that was satisfactory. He'd even managed to get the word proud out. This teacher thing wasn't so hard. Then Midoriya looked up at him. And he was crying. No, not crying. His eyes were glimmering, but he wasn't letting himself cry. Can't take praise. Surprised when I compliment him. Cries when I'm proud of him. There was something severely wrong with something in Midoriya's past. It couldn't have just been Shuta's paranoia. Thanks, sensei. Midoriya exclaimed, smiling to cover up the fact he was about to cry. Ashamed of his emotions? He set a hand on Midoriya's shoulder. He did it slowly and obviously, and the boy didn't flinch, but he did stiffen and then relax. Typical problem child behavior. Suddenly, Shoyuta realized he would probably kill a man to protect this batch of kids. He'd already given one a nickname. And gotten attached. God, this teacher thing was hard. Izuku went home and huddled over his desk that night, gnawing on his pencil for a while, and eventually scribbled in another star by Aizawa's name. Hey! Izuku looked up from where he was dumping his lunch tray into the trash, surprised when he saw the purple-haired boy from the other day standing there. He had a hand on the back of his neck, and wasn't looking him directly in the eyes, but it was obvious he was talking to him. Oh hi, he replied. Did you need something? Just the other boy said, then rolled his eyes at himself. Just figured I should thank you for the other day. Look, I'm not here to make friends, but you helped me out, so thanks. Izuku stood there for a second, stunned someone was thanking him, before brightening. It's no problem, he exclaimed. I'm Midoriya Izuku, by the way, but you can call me Izuku. Shinso Hitoshi, but like I said, I'm not Dash. You should come train with me next week. Izuku bulldozed through whatever he'd been saying about not having friends, grinning. Gym 5C, 4 o'clock, so you can practice hand-to-hand combat. You want to be a hero, right? See you there. He turned and ran, leaving Shinso with an open mouth, too excited to really notice the other boy trying to deny his offer. He should have known the semester going smoothly was a bad omen. Villains showing up at the USJ he could deal with. They could call for help. There was just a lot of them. And they couldn't call for help, and they were being scattered, and water was going down his throat. Izuku coughed and spluttered. He still wasn't that great at swimming, and panic started to swirl in his mind as he activated his quirk out of pure instinct to not die. A tidal wave formed in the water as he pushed off, scrambling for the bank, and pulled himself up the side, hacking and dribbling water. It was a horrifying scene he looked up to. There were villains everywhere, and Aizawa-sensei was fighting them all alone. More panic sat in his gut, and he had to clamp down on the urge to take off running, to try and help, because he would probably just make it harder for his teacher. Then his eyes landed on two villains who weren't attacking Eraserhead. A gigantic, terrifying-looking creature, and a slim man in frayed clothes with hands. God, were those real hands? All over his body, one obscuring his face. What the hell? That had to be the person calling the shots. The villain's leader. Apex Predator. His quirk thrummed restlessly beneath his skin. He was making a very stupid decision. He should have run and helped someone else, but something made his feet start moving forward. He had to keep them all safe. He had to make sure the ringleader didn't get them. He had to make sure. Oh, what's this? Some hero hopeful brat? Izuku barely registered the fact that the villain had spoken to him. He came to a stop, a few paces away, and distantly wondered what the hell he was doing. Instead, what came out of his mouth was, "What are you doing?" The villain paused, like he hadn't been expecting that question. What? What are you doing? Izuku repeated, a frown settling on his lips. "You're just standing here, aren't you attacking us?" The man snorted derisively. He sounded young, not like a teenager, but not like he was all that old either. "Oh please. I wouldn't waste my time on NPCs like you. You're just bait. All Might was supposed to be here, wasn't he?" Even past the hand, Izuku could see a bone-chilling grin. "I can't wait until he gets here and I get to end the symbol of peace once and for all." "Stay calm," Izuku urged himself, years of having to stand still and listen to Bakugo's explosions going off by his ears just inches from his skin repressing even the smallest twitch. He didn't plan this through. All Might's not here. He's not re-evaluating. He isn't thinking that more heroes will probably show up. Not a chess player, then. A lesser apex predator. Why do you want to kill All Might? The thought made him feel even more panicked, because if the guy was so sure he could do it, he had to have something powerful up his sleeve, namely, the giant creature behind him, but he forced himself to remain calm. "To blow the top off this wretched society wide open," the man yelled, then swept his hands out with a broken cackle. "To show everyone that their symbol of peace is just a prop, another government-sanctioned tool of violence that only makes them feel safe with lies. Heroes don't save people." A sneer appeared on his lips, derogatory and vindictive. "All you pros, all you do is punch people and call it a day." Despite the rapid beating of his heart, Izuku's brain was quickly categorizing everything the man said. He hated it, but he understood what he was saying and what he wasn't. He was more than familiar with being disillusioned by society. But an ideological debate right now wasn't going to convince the guy to leave them alone. Izuku doubted he even could convince him. "You're right." The villain froze. He tilted his head, slowly, like a sort of dog, and turned his whole body to look at him, which felt worse. A lot worse. "What?" "I said dash," Izuku began, clearing his throat. "Oh no," the man interrupted him, sounding angrier than before. "Danger. Don't you try and pull that sheet on me." "Oh, I understand how you feel, but let us trample all over you anyway dash." "That's not what I mean," Izuku blazed on, hoping this gamble worked. "I mean, I still think this is a stupid, thoughtless, reckless plan, and you aren't going to be able to kill All Might, and I'd rather you leave me and my classmates alone, but you are right." The man froze again. He was twitching, as was the monster behind him, which seemed to grow more agitated when he did, and he looked like he was splitting down the middle. Like he couldn't possibly conceive of how Izuku was both agreeing and disagreeing with him at the same time. "Explain," he said, voice quiet and cold. "Not all heroes are good people," Izuku said quickly, a chill to him that wasn't just from the water. "There's a lot of bad ones. People aren't actually safe just because All Might exists. Even if he's powerful, he's one person, and he can't be everywhere all the time. So you're right about that, but this isn't going to help you any." For a moment, he paused, and all he could hear was the sounds of his classmates fighting in the distance. Think about it. If word got out that you killed a bunch of first years, people you could also say are the youngest ones being indoctrinated into hero society, and the people who are most likely to switch causes, wouldn't the media just vilify you? They'd just see a guy who killed a bunch of kids. No one would be on your side, or listen to what you had to say. Furthermore, that this plan is clearly just thrown together. He raised a hand to encompass everything around them, imagining Bakugo's voice saying he was so stupid for doing this. "I mean, your own allies are obviously just NPCs. They're getting taken out by first years with little to no training and a man who by all rights is fighting quirkless because he has no offensive quirk. That tells me you don't care about them, that they're just a distraction. So the only real threats are you, that warping villain, who hasn't done anything but displace people, and that whatever his name is." His eyes flicked to the giant monster, anxious, and he swallowed. "Don't show your fear. You attacked a training ground of Yui, and we aren't that far out from the school. If All Might hears about this, the other teachers are going to as well, and they're all going to come here. Even if you're as powerful as All Might, you'll then be outmatched, because All Might and countless other pros will be here. Even if you kill All Might, what then? All that will be on the news is you killed Japan's most beloved hero, nothing about whatever message you're trying to spread. People will hate you." He stopped, and for several moments, The distant sounds of battle became a rush in his ears and they could have heard a pin drop. The man stared at him, neck twitching, and slowly let out a harsh-sounding breath. He reached up and scratched at his neck, breathing heavier, and gnashed his teeth. Your apex predators only reacted in two ways when confronted. They either backed down or exploded. Izuku had always had rotten luck. Let's see what your smart little mouth thinks of this, the man raged, rushing towards him with a palm outstretched. That was the moment Izuku saw Aizawa, yards away from them in between two men trying to wrestle with them both, staring at them with a gaze burning with panic. Not just my student is being attacked kind of panic, but raw, he's going to die panic. And he vaguely noted he really wished he knew what this villain's quirk was. The guy swiped at him, but nothing happened. Partly because Izuku ducked, partly because Aizawa's eyes were now burning a hole into him, bright red. The man growled and tried to grab him again. Izuku activated full cowling and retreated a few yards, not yet attacking, and let out a slow. NPCs. You're trying to be the protagonist, aren't you? He probed, dropping into more of a crouch and narrowing his eyes. Like All Might is the big boss fight you need to level up? The man froze as it somehow resonated with him, and looked at Izuku with feral eyes. But you're going at a mission underleveled with no party members. No smart player does that. Certainly not someone trying to be the boss. It was either the wrong or exactly right thing to say, because the villain made a mad dash at him, and then Aizawa came crashing in literally. He crashed into the man who Izuku would later learn was called Shigaraki, rolling in the dirt, and came to a stop pressing down on his side with one of the man's arms bent to the side, eyes glowing a fiery red. "Stay the hell away from my student," he growled, goggles cracked but not yet broken. "Nomu!" Shigaraki yelled, and the giant creature lunged. Izuku screamed, "No!" That's when the wall busted open. In the end, when nearly all the criminals were laid out on the floor, All Might was clashing with the Nomu, and someone had yelled out that help was on the way because Ida had managed to escape. Izuku saw the villain from behind Aizawa-sensei, seeing as the man was standing there in front of him with his knife in case Shigaraki tried to make a move for him, tilt his head and let out a quiet, dull order. "Kurogyri, let's go." A purple warp appeared behind him. "Young master, are you sure dash? Let's go. I need to level up." He sent an intense stare Izuku's way, which made Aizawa edge in front of him further, and then the duo was gone. Izuku let out a sigh of relief. When the other teachers arrived and sat everyone down on the steps for first aid, he caught wind of Tsu complaining that Minetta had groped her when she rescued him, and that familiar little anger reared its head again. It seemed he had someone new to dig up dirt on. The news that Izuku had basically convinced the villains to leave merely by talking to their leaders swept through school like wildfire. Izuku didn't think that was accurate. If his classmates hadn't done so well defeating the lesser villains, if All Might hadn't arrived, if the other pros hadn't either, they'd have all been toast, he thought, but people looked at him with awe. The other first years seemed impressed with him, and honestly, he hated the attention. Aizawa patted him on the head after the fact and told him to never, ever, and I mean never, do something that reckless again, problem child. "So," Hitoshi said, a bit awkwardly, when he showed up to the gym like he hadn't agreed to, "Guess you're kind of a big deal, huh?" "Please don't say that," Izuku replied desperately, biting back a groan. "I didn't even do anything, honestly. Everyone else was way more useful. They say you've got some big-shot quirk though." "I really don't," Izuku countered, oozing something like guilt. "I swear, I'm more worthless than everyone in my class. I'm not useful at all." Something about the way he talked about himself made Hitoshi uncomfortable. "If you've got such a great quirk, why didn't you use that?" he asked, feeling suspicious. Izuku's eyes darted away from him as he scuffed one heel in the dirt. Something about the way he talked, about how he carried himself, called out to something in Hitoshi. Like he was talking to himself. Like maybe Midoriya understood him somehow. "Well, that IT didn't actually come in until recently, and I'm not that trained with it, so it can be dangerous to use that. I actually thought I was quirkless most of my life, although I always wanted to come here, but everyone said that was stupid," Midoriya said, trailing off into a mumbled rant as was apparently his habit. A quirkless loser can't really amount to much, but turns out I have one after all, so I'm just trying to not break anything else and sorry, I'm rambling, I know it's really annoying dash. Hitoshi didn't think it was annoying. He thought it was illuminating. People would be pretty stupid if they didn't listen to the other boy, he thought. There was so much information to be had when people didn't even realize they were talking. Quirkless loser. Everyone said that was stupid. The way he hunched in on himself when particularly loud noises went off in the cafeteria. Hitoshi had noticed. He had a growing hunch that Izuku was a lot like him after all. So, he could stand being friends with someone with such a ridiculously powerful quirk if that was the situation. Brought a sparring partner today, Midoriya? And there was the teacher for 1A. Hitoshi clamped down on a flinch of his own, hopefully before the man noticed. Izuku brightened like the sun appearing from behind some clouds. This is Shinso. He wants to be a hero, he's in general studies, so I told him he could spar with me. Hitoshi didn't know why, but he felt like he'd hitched a ride with something wildly unpredictable. 2 days later, he peered over Izuku's shoulder at lunch with a raised eyebrow as he tapped away at a tablet in his hands. "What are you doing?" he asked, trying to appraise it for himself but unable to read anything at the speed Izuku was scrolling. The other boy glanced up at him and smiled. It was very pure, innocent, and all teeth. "Oh, I'm going to get Minetta expelled." Hitoshi stood there blankly and said nothing. Some nobody from 1B he didn't know the name of behind them cringed and picked up the pace to get away from them. "Send me anything that turns out funny," he ended up settling on, and promptly walked away. He didn't want to get all wrapped up in that mess. Minetta was acting nervous. Probably due to the fact that Izuku had been following him for 4 days straight. Even the most unobservant of targets would pick up on the fact they were being watched eventually. Minetta didn't know it was him. He only started to become jumpy and looked around like he was being stalked when he felt Izuku's eyes on him. A small part of Izuku's brain reveled in it, because the boy deserved it. It was how he made girls feel, so why shouldn't he get a taste of it? The accident at USJ hadn't been Minetta's only offense, as Izuku's research had turned up. Mina said he made uncomfortable comments to her almost daily. Tsu said he definitely grabbed her on purpose and clearly enjoyed it. Kyuka and Momo both grimaced and corroborated the fact he made crude comments either to them or around them, and even Toru, being invisible, didn't escape it, as she'd sounded teary-eyed when she said Minetta had made a comment about how disappointing it was her chest. Couldn't be seen, but it was exciting to know he was looking at her when she had to disrobe to use her invisibility. Then Ochako told him she'd caught Minetta trying to peek into their locker rooms. "Oh," Izuku was said. Mere weeks into school, and Minetta was already doing such disgusting things? How worse would he get as the year went on, and he didn't get punished for his behavior because he always made up an excuse or only did it where a teacher wouldn't see. "Hi, Minetta." The smaller boy squeaked and whipped around when Izuku spoke. They were standing in the hallway, near the restrooms, and Minetta had been staring at the girl's room, looking like he was inching closer. "Oh, Midoriya," he said, laughing uneasily. "Whatcha doing, pal?" "Just watching you," Izuku returned in a cool tone of voice, making Minetta pale. There was, after all, no reason to lie about what he was doing. "You weren't planning on trying to sneak into the girl's restroom, were you?" "What?" "No," Minetta laughed, the lie clear in his voice. "Well, that's good. That would be a bad thing to do, you know? Something a villain would do. You wouldn't do anything like that, would you, Minetta?" "No. I swear I wouldn't," Minetta told him, a tremor in his voice and a shaky smile on his face. But there really was no hope for him. Unaware that there were people around them who had stopped to watch, Izuku let a smile onto his face. It made Minetta squeak again. "Well, that's good. Say, why don't we walk back to class together? Lunch is almost over after all." "Oh, you don't need to do that, Dash. It's fine, we're together after all. If you need to do something I can wait." "No," Minetta muttered, ducking his head. "I don't need to do anything. We can go." Izuku smiled and walked beside him in the hall, right next to him, so close the other boy was clearly afraid without fully knowing why. He never noticed how people moved out of their way. Izuku turned up the ante over the next few days. Every day, he kept one eye on Minetta, glancing at him every so often in class so he knew someone was watching, and sat next to him at lunch, maneuvering them so no girls were near him. When they changed for training, Izuku lingered, standing at the entrance to the girls' locker rooms and staring Minetta down while they all trickled out fully dressed. In training, he volunteered to partner up with Minetta or, if he was on an opposing team, always went for him first. Everyone else had noticed him hanging around Minetta more by now. Most of the class chalked it up to him being friendly, but the girls all gave him thankful looks and smiles when they passed him. They were by no means just passive participants, however. They wrote down every comment Minetta still managed to make and walked in groups, glaring at Minetta when they saw him, obviously singling him out and making him aware they knew what he was doing. Izuku had also formed an odd friendship with Momo over this. She was usually the messenger between him and the other girls, and seemed so grateful for his help. She pulled a copy of his favorite type of candy bar out of her wrist while they stood around watching sparring matches not 10 minutes after she'd glared at Minetta and said she wasn't a production factory when he'd asked if he could make things for them. That had been a little funny. It wasn't like they were harassing Minetta, though. They left him alone after hours and didn't give him any attention that wasn't meant to ward him away. Izuku knew his type exactly. Any tiny thing they could make out to be an offense against them, they would. They would say they were being bullied or unfairly judged or whatever else to make people feel bad for them so they could keep being creepy. Minetta, however, didn't exercise the same caution, and Izuku walked up behind him outside the school gates after school one day while he was talking to Kyuka, who had a look of disgust on her face, and caught the tail end of what he was saying. "Come on, Ju, just for a second." Kyuka's eyes landed on Midoriya a mere 2 feet behind him. Her expression changed, just slightly, and she put more venom into her next sentence. "I'm not letting you touch my bias, Minetta," she spat. "Come on," Minetta whined, waving his hands. "It's not like you have much, you should be flattered a guy is interested." Kyuka twitched wildly, and Momo scowled beside Izuku, but neither of them did anything. Better to let Minetta seal his own fate, they thought. This is a gross way to talk to someone, and even if I liked guys, I still wouldn't let you do it. Minetta's face lit up. Izuku could tell just from his tone. "Wait, you like girls? Hee hee, that's even better. Maybe you and Azui can touch each other and I can just have a peek?" "I told you, leave me alone, and no." "Hi, Minetta," Izuku finally interrupted, smiling as Minetta shrieked and whipped around with a look of pure horror. "And Midoriya? What are you doing?" "Walking home, what else would I be doing?" Izuku returned rhetorically, tilting his head. "Hey Kyuka, why don't you walk with Momo and I? It's better to walk with people, and I wear a body camera for safety." Kyuka smiled triumphantly at him. "Sure thing, Zuku." Izuku took great satisfaction in the pale, terrified look on Minetta's face as they walked away. The staff room was, blessedly, empty when Izuku made a trip to it with a USB drive to see Aizawa. It was the man's office hours, which meant he was at his desk working, though most of the time he was passed out in his sleeping bag, and Mike-sensei had let him out of class when he said he needed to go see Aizawa. He was fairly flexible when it came to things like that. Even though he knew what he was doing was right, Izuku felt a bit nervous when he stepped inside and saw Aizawa sitting at his desk. His expression was dull, and he looked like he'd rather be doing anything else than what he was, which was, ironically, searching for information on Izuku's own middle school. Izuku wondered how much sleep he'd gotten the night before. Aizawa-sensei?" Aizawa blinked and reflexively clicked out of his window. He turned in his chair, rubbing at his eyes, and squinted at him. "Midoriya? Why are you out of class?" "Mike-sensei said I could come see you," Izuku replied, holding out his drive a bit jerkily. "I needed to give this to you." Aizawa raised an eyebrow and took it from him. Izuku pulled a small bunch of papers from his backpack and handed those to him as well, and he frowned down at them. "What are these?" "Well." Izuku paused, hesitating. From the girls. I didn't know if you would need signed copies, so." "Signed copies? About?" "Minetta." Aizawa's frown deepened, and Izuku struggled not to cringe. "He's really creepy, and he's always making comments to the girls that I think are SXL harassment." We keep catching him trying to sneak into the locker rooms or bathrooms, but he always makes up an excuse like he got lost or was just walking by, so I thought we would need more evidence to get him expelled, or at least moved to a different class. I recorded him with my camera outside of school harassing Kyuka and trying to get her to let him touch her, and for everything else I made a log of where he was and what time it was when he said or did something, because I figure the hallways at least have security cameras so you can corroborate what the girls said, and I also looked up where he went to middle school and found some of the girls from his graduating class online, and they all have stories about him, but I don't know if his school will have any record of it. Aizawa's face got progressively grumpier as he spoke, though it was more likely due to the contents of the letter he was reading from Toru. I've expelled students for less, so I don't need any files from his old school, but I'll look into it anyway, he said, still scowling as he looked up, though his voice changed back into a neutral tone before addressing him directly. Why didn't you come to me about this right away? Izuku paused. Why hadn't he? He didn't know if he'd thought Aizawa would believe them or not. It was really just habit. It didn't occur to me, sensei. Sorry, he said, averting his eyes and flushing a deep red. Aizawa sat there for a moment, thinking of the relatively spotless reputation Midoriya's middle school had, but also the fact it serviced an area with less than a 0.3% quirkless population. It's fine, he said. But please know in the future you can come to me about anything. If there is anything, any person, any student after a pause, he tacked on, any teacher, that bothers you or someone you know, please tell me right away. I promise I will believe you. He reached out and ruffled the boy's hair. Really? Tumbled out of Izuku's mouth, on reflex, as he stared wide-eyed at him, cementing Aizawa's suspicion that a long string of adults in his student's life had failed him even if he didn't know exactly how or in what ways. Yes, problem child really. Midoriya smiled. Even though Aizawa had felt like strangling something mere moments before, that part felt good. Midoriya added 2 stars to his notebook entry when he got home. With a string of girls behind him, including 2 from Class 1B he didn't know but were now watching from the corner of the hall like hawks after being absorbed into their group without question, Izuku peered at the door to Mike Sensei's class where Aizawa had gone inside after present Mike held Minetta back. The usually cheerful blonde had looked carefully blank when he'd pulled the door shut. After about 2 minutes, the door flew open harder than usual. It didn't quite slam, but it was clear whoever had opened it was in a sour mood. Minetta walked out, pale in the face and with giant alligator tears in his eyes, with Aizawa behind him, glowering with his hands shoved into his pockets. They marched away without saying anything, but Izuku saw Minetta's student ID hanging off Aizawa's belt, and realized with a grin that he was escorting him off campus. Present Mike exited the classroom and sighed. What a disappointment, he muttered in English, which Izuku understood better now that he had all Mike to practice with, before heading off to wherever his next class was. Nice job, Midoriya, Mina exclaimed, pushing off the wall with a beam and raising a hand to high-five him. She started a string of them all around as they stood in the hall sacrificing part of their lunch to celebrate the Grape Creep's expulsion, cheering to themselves. When they did head to the cafeteria, all smiles, and a boy ahead in line realized Midoriya was behind him, he turned with a nervous smile and gave off a laugh. Here, you can move up ahead of me. Really? Thanks, Izuku replied, totally oblivious as several boys let them move up, and he figured it was because he was with a pack of girls. They stopped when they got to another girl with orange hair near the front, after all, who just gave him a bright smile and a wink. A blonde boy ahead of her muttered something about white knighting pretentious little dash, and she promptly punched him in the gut, an incident that didn't appear to worry anyone around them. People were being friendly, and Minetta was gone. He considered that a great day in his books. As not just a female pro but a female teacher here at UA, I feel the need to address what happened last Friday, Midnight said on Monday morning, hands on her hips as she stood at the podium holding her textbook open. A student was expelled for SXL harassment, and I want to make sure you all know that isn't tolerated at UA, especially by me. SXL harassment can happen to anyone of any gender, and similarly be perpetrated by anyone of any gender, and if you feel you've experienced it, you should always come to a teacher about it. However, It is also a problem that disproportionately affects women heroes and those of a different SXL orientation or gender identity than the norm. That makes it all the more important to watch out for your friends and be an ally to those who need it. That is a true motivation of being a hero. If any of you ever need someone to speak with, I promise I will listen and believe you, and if you don't want to talk to me, we have several school counselors available for you. She glanced over at where Izuku was sitting and let out a smile. And to those of you who did watch out for your friends, thank you. You are already showing the most important part of being a hero. Izuku flushed in embarrassment, but no one was looking at him other than Ochako sending him a small smile, because Midnight hadn't made it apparent she was staring at him. It felt nice, knowing she approved of him but wasn't going to drag it out in front of the whole class. That class PRD was focused on improving their hero costumes. Midnight made her way around the room, making suggestions and pointing out possible flaws, and when she saw the detailed sketch he'd been working on with May, crouched down and spent several minutes talking with him about it and ways he could make it stand out from the crowd a little more. Without being an eyesore or giving up his green shtick. She didn't think any of his ideas were stupid, that, in itself, was nice too. Izuku blocked in a star by her name and put down some notes, content that night. Good job, my boy, was rapidly becoming one of Izuku's favorite things to hear, because All Might always said it at the end of their training sessions at the beach. He always said it with a cheerful smile, a shine in his eye, a look of pride that felt so unfamiliar to receive. He'd been rather apologetic that Izuku's arm had broken at the entrance exam, not that he could have avoided it, because Izuku's body would have exploded even worse even a day earlier, but overjoyed that he'd found a way to channel the power of One for All safely. More often than not their training just devolved into fancy games of tag with full cowling that were definitely for educational purposes only, even if there was a lot of laughing involved. He'd also suggested, in Izuku's spare time, to try and meditate to get a better feel of One for All. So, that's what he was doing. Is this supposed to do something? Meditation can be a useful training technique, Aizawa intoned, answering Hitoshi, who just sighed in response. The man sounded half asleep, and he was very much using this as an excuse to try and nap. Somewhere off to the side, May hummed happily to herself as she fiddled with the piece of support equipment she was making for Hitoshi. He'd said multiple times she didn't have to make anything for him, but she just responded with, "You will accept and show off the deliciousness I put in motion for you, and take my baby," which had rendered him silent for about a full hour. Hitoshi may have thought it was silly, but Izuku actually found himself enjoying it. Meditation, that is. He felt weightless, like all his worries were far away, that like no one could say anything that bothered him ever again. Maybe All Might's advice had something to it, maybe he was getting something useful out of this. "You're just napping and you know it," Hitoshi said, and for some reason he sounded far away. What? Izuku opened his eyes to look at his friend. Except Hitoshi wasn't there. All he could see was the side of the gym, many yards away, and he was eye level with the line of windows above their heads. The fact that he was floating in midair hit him a moment later, and his brain fast-tracked past his logic and decided to scream. "Oh my God!" he shrieked, flailing his arms. What was he supposed to do? Stay still or try to move? Which one would make him fall? Oh my God, sensei, Aizawa sensei dash. Aizawa's capture weapon whirled out and folded around him in a flash of movement. Izuku felt himself being tugged down, eerily similar to how Aizawa had been forced to pull Uraraka down one time during training when she got sick midair and couldn't come down on her own. He wasn't screaming anymore, the weight of the capture weapon around him almost like a comforting blanket, but he was breathing heavily when Aizawa wrapped both arms around his upper body and held him to his chest on the ground, eyes going red. "Midoriya," he said as calmly and rationally as he could, even though he'd clearly just had the sheet scared out of him, because his voice never went as tense as this. "Calm down. You're all right." Hitoshi stared at him with wide eyes. It wasn't every day one's friends just went floating off into the distance, after all. Izuku focused on his breathing, then felt a rush of embarrassment, realizing how silly he must have sounded and probably looked. I'm fine," he said, though he was still trembling a little. "I'm okay." Aizawa let his own quirk deactivate. Like magic, Izuku started to float again, and he barely contained a shriek as Aizawa tightened his grip again. The teacher turned until he found Hitoshi still sitting there like a startled deer. "Go get Ochako Uraraka," he barked out, eyes squinting in a way Hitoshi understood to mean they were starting to feel dry. "She's in 1A's classroom, brunette hair. Go!" Hitoshi jumped and leapt to his feet, SNG out of the gym to go and find Uraraka and interrupt whatever she was doing during their free PRD. Izuku tried to calm himself down, he really did, but Mei's excited yammering in the background about the possibilities this unveiled about his quirk didn't help much. After all, it was his quirk that was doing it, as evidenced by Aizawa's canceling it out, and that meant he now had to learn to control floating too. "See? This isn't so bad," Ochako told him, face soft and excited all at once as she held his hands a few feet above the sparring pads. Hers were alight with a pink glow, anchoring them both in place. "I think it's great you can float, Izuku, that means we can plan team attacks." Izuku glanced down at the ground and let out a watery smile. He really had underestimated the constitution it took to use her quirk, not that he'd thought Ochako was a chump or anything. Just the knowledge that at any moment he could go crashing to the ground and probably break everything in his body was wigging him out. "Yeah," he said with a half-hearted laugh. "Guess my quirk is just full of surprises." "Don't float away into the sun," Hitoshi called up quite helpfully from the sidelines, a hand cupped around his mouth. Beside him, Aizawa looked very much like he was trying hard not to roll his eyes, boxing the boy on top of the head as lightly as he would a kitten. "Come on," Ochako urged him, taking away one of her hands and making him jump. He looked up at her with frantic green eyes, but she just gave him an encouraging smile. "It's fine. I promise. Floating is really fun once you get used to it. I know it's really scary at first, but I won't let you fall. I promise. Remember the entrance exam." Izuku thought back to the first day he'd met her. He'd saved her life, then she'd saved his, by slapping him, literally. "Yeah. You fell from way higher then. But I still didn't let you fall, and I won't now. Deal?" Izuku hesitantly glanced down at their joined hands. He looked back up at her and tried to muster a smile of his own, and slowly eased his grip on her. "Okay." She let go of him, and he floated, all on his own. There were a few points at which Aizawa had to retrieve him from the ceiling of their classroom over the next 2 days. Bakugo had metaphorically and literally exploded when it came out that Izuku had another power, which Aizawa believed to be subtle energy radiating from his body and allowing him to levitate. He had no idea if that was true or not, as he hadn't had a chance to ask All Might yet, and it had startled Izuku so badly he'd almost darted behind their homeroom teacher to hide. The glare Aizawa gave Bakugo cowed him, at least, and everyone else decided to congratulate him, and Ochako was still overjoyed their powers were so similar. Then at their next training session another quirk came out. Izuku hadn't meant to, not really, he'd known he would eventually fall down at least once, like the metaphorical first fall from a horse all riders had to go through. Still, he panicked when the floating ability suddenly stopped, and threw out his arm to try and hang on to something. Nothing was close enough, though. That was when a black tendril shot out and wrapped around one of the rafters of the ceiling. Now, he hadn't entirely meant to, but gut instinct along with the new and weird connection he felt with One for All had just made it happen, somehow. Izuku hung for a minute, just staring, before slowly turning to look at Aizawa and Mei on the ground. Predictably, Mei looked overjoyed, clicking at her portable computer with the speed of a jaguar as she speculated on how his new power worked, and Aizawa looked disbelieving, staring at him like he would sprout another head too. "You're OP, Hitoshi said from one of the rock-climbing walls, a little petty but not truly upset. "Unfair." They decided to keep that one under wraps. Izuku didn't want Bakugo to explode again. But still, he really needed to talk to All Might now. The black tendrils seemed much more wiry and hard to handle than floating, and he didn't manage to summon another one again for a day, and he decided to be content with a slow pace for once as he went and hunted All Might down during lunch. He tended to eat alone in one of the staff rooms, and Izuku had a weird sense for finding the man. All Might. He hesitantly peered into the room Toshinori usually inhabited. He looked up, cheerful, from the sofa, and motioned for him to step inside. "Come on in, my boy. How are you?" "Fine," Izuku said, but All Might must have noticed his down mood, because a slight frown came across his haggard face. "Something the matter, young Midoriya?" Not exactly," Izuku replied, walking over to the couch across from him and sitting down. What question did he start with? "So, I had some questions about One for All?" Toshinori raised an eyebrow at him. "Of course, Midoriya, anything you'd like to know." "What if he doesn't know?" "So that the only power it ever gave you was a super strength?" A small crease formed between Toshinori's eyebrows. "Yes, it increased my vitality and gave me access to an enormous stock of power that allowed me to pull off such feats as jumping between buildings and smashing monsters." "Why do you ask?" "Well, just to be sure IT never let you do anything else?" Izuku was starting to sweat, starting to get nervous, which now made him start to float away sometimes, which made him even more nervous. "Like, levitate?" Toshinori's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" he asked, but he sounded surprised, not offended. "You said levitate?" "I was in the gym the other day and then I started floating," Izuku blurted out. "And I fell while I was floating and caught myself with a piece of black energy?" "You said One for All is a stockpiling quirk, right? Does that mean it collected other powers? Did I steal people's quirks? Does Midoriya, wait." Toshinori cried, holding his hands up and dropping his chopsticks in the process. He looked positively befuddled, eyes wider than usual. "You're saying you actually flew? Can you show me?" Nodding, Izuku bit his lip in concentration and slowly came floating off the sofa. Toshinori paled a little, looking as though he'd seen a ghost, but then his expression took a completely 180, and he lit up. "My boy," he said, sounding excited as he reached up to grab Izuku's sleeves and drag him back down. "I had no idea this was possible, but it's exactly as I remember. You're using the quirk of my late master, Nana Shimura. She utilized the power of float to fly through the sky, just as you just did." "So IT is her quirk?" Izuku asked, brain still lagging. "Yes." Toshinori cried excitedly. "It's as you said, One for All is a stockpiling quirk. It must take the quirk of its current user into its core and pass it on to the next user. That would mean you theoretically have access to every quirk of those who came before you. But why didn't you ever feel them?" "I'm not sure of the answer to that," Toshinori admitted, making sure he was solidly on the couch before letting go of him. "Perhaps because I didn't truly need them. I trained intensely to receive One for All, and I didn't share the same level of danger upon using it as your body does. Even if it is hard to master, I have always believed that One for All is intuitively protective of its user, and perhaps this is its way of giving you aid." Izuku glanced down at his hands and thought over his mentor's words. If he was correct, did that mean that his quirk approved of him? Found him worthy to succeed All Might? Thought he of all people was worthy of wielding One for All? "Oh yeah," he said as an afterthought, trying not to let how emotional he was feeling bleed into his voice. "I, kind of had to tell Aizawa-sensei kind of what's going on. He got really suspicious after I got a third quirk." "Ah," Toshinori said, sure he would receive an earful later from the other man. "Well, it can't be helped. He is very intelligent, he would have sensed something was amiss eventually. My boy? Young Midoriya? Midoriya, you? Izuku, you're floating to the ceiling. I am very unimpressed if you're wondering, problem child, but that is something I'll take up with All Might, not you," Aizawa-sensei had said, looking vaguely annoyed as they stood in the gym. And he did give All Might a mild tongue lashing, Izuku was guessing, because he spotted Toshinori coming out of the staff room looking mildly chastised and a bit embarrassed, and Aizawa following him rolling his eyes. Aizawa flat out told him he'd criticized the symbol of peace to his face when he asked, but couldn't fault the whole situation too much, because even he couldn't guess the threshold for, when is someone prepared to receive a powerful stockpile quirk? If pull cars and a heavy fridge with All Might himself on it off the beach wasn't enough. Blackwhip exploded on him when he tried to use it again, a writhing mass of black tentacles waving. everywhere, and busted through Mei's latest round of equipment that thankfully saved him from some broken bones. He was determined to use it, though, and eventually managed to get one single whip to spring forth from his arm, and then two, and then he split it off into three. He just wouldn't take no for an answer, even if it meant breaking more parts of his body. Something about the quirk seemed to respect that, almost. And perhaps his primary motivation was that if an offensive strength quirk wouldn't work, and an evasive flying quirk wouldn't work, a defensive restraint quirk would help him out in a lot of situations, because his teacher fought just the same way. Indeed, the whips were well suited to functioning just like Aizawa-sensei's capture weapon, and maybe he did want to match with Hitoshi on team attacks now that the other boy was using a capture weapon of his own too. And maybe they ended up haphazardly swinging around the gym like they were on a bunch of monkey bars while Aizawa's back was turned, and ended up rolled up in his weapon when he returned and scolded them, but that was another matter entirely. The next week, they received news about the upcoming sports festival, and he wondered idly if he still had his tapes from the last year. Hey, you. Izuku heard Kaminari laugh unevenly at lunch, shortly after Minetta was expelled. And Yororozu and Uraraka, and Midoriya. Izuku looked up from where he was shoved in between Ochako and Momo at their table, while Kyuka raised an eyebrow at the anxious blonde from her side of the table. Tsuyu had been sitting beside her, but she'd gone to get more chocolate milk. What's up, Kaminari? Izuku could practically see the sweat shine on Kaminari's forehead. He sent another anxious glance towards him, maybe for reassurance, and cleared his throat. Well, I just wanted to apologize. Kyuka's eyebrow raised higher. It's just, since Minetta got expelled, I've been thinking, and I realized what I said on the first day probably probably was really creepy. I don't remember it exactly, but, he said something about how lucky we were to have such a bunch of pretty girls in class, and I agreed with him. But I realized that he probably meant it in a little different way than I did, because I really didn't mean to be creepy, but also I know what I meant doesn't matter, and, I'm really sorry if I came off like a creep. I swear I would never do anything like he did, and I didn't mean to, Izuku felt a little bad for him at that point. His apology was rambling, all over the place, and very disjointed, but he could tell he really did feel bad. It's fine, dude, Kyuka said with a snort, taking a sip of her box of apple juice. I know you aren't like Minetta. We're cool. A sigh of relief escaped Kaminari's lungs. Oh really? Awesome, he said, some of the anxiety leaving his expression. I, really did feel bad, especially when I heard you, you know. You know. Kaminari stressed, forehead crinkling. Don't like guys. Kyuka's eyebrow raised again. I like girls, and guys too? And I just felt really bad I might have made you feel gross since, you know. Kyuka's face relaxed again. She looked a bit amused and cracked a small smile. Oh, I get it. It's fine, Kaminari, really. We're cool, right? Right? Momo said with a smile, looking proud of their interpersonal development. I can tell you're being genuine, Kaminari. Water under the bridge. Ochako agreed. Kaminari's eyes flitted over to him again. Izuku smiled, trying to make him feel at ease, and he visibly relaxed. Great, he said with a grin, pointing his thumb at where Kirishima and Bakugo sat tearing into their sandwiches. I'm gonna get back to eating, but, see you in class. With an awkward laugh, he jogged off, and Tsu flopped back into her seat a few moments later. Kyuka informed her of their classmates' appreciated, but still vaguely amusing, apology with a huff of a laugh. Izuku sometimes slipped outside to spend some of his lunch hour on the grounds. He didn't know if that was technically allowed, but nobody had told him not to do it, so he often took little snacks to the squirrels that lived in the trees. Hi, Koda, he said cheerfully, spotting his classmate sitting under one of said trees cross-legged on the ground. Koda smiled, at ease and relaxed, since they saw each other more often than not, though they didn't talk much. He bent down and sprinkled some of his nuts from lunch in the grass. A squirrel that had learned his patterns by now darted down from a branch of the tree in front of him and ran out to swipe them for itself. Before it could take them all, it looked up and let out a few squeaks, then ran back to the tree. Izuku heard footsteps coming down the path behind him, and turned to peer over his shoulder, finding exactly who he'd been meaning to talk to coming towards them. Awesome. Izuku had seen enough sports festivals to know there was usually a team exercise. He, Ochako, and Mei had gotten it into their heads they could make a very effective flying team, and really, how many teams could fly? A very small percentage, statistically, but they were missing a member. But Tokoyami, due to his quirk, was a perfect fit. Out of anyone in their class, he was best suited. He could have asked Hitoshi, but they both had mutually and silently agreed to a little competition, and he could tell Hitoshi wanted to prove himself on his own. Tokoyami, he greeted, standing up and jogging towards the other student. A flash of surprise crossed his face, but he didn't look adverse to Izuku's presence. It was kind of hard to tell sometimes, since he wasn't used to the boy's expressions. Hi. So, about the sports festival that I kind of had a question. Oh, what is it, Midoriya? Izuku gulped. This was the part that made him nervous. Okay, so. Tokoyami looked friendly enough standing there, but they just didn't talk a lot, and Izuku just hoped he didn't offend him. So, I promise I'm not asking you this because your head looks like a bird. Not a great start. Tokoyami's eyebrow quirked. Izuku felt like slapping himself in the face. I mean, he started to ramble, briefly covering his eyes with his fingers. About the sports festival. Every year, there's a team exercise, and Uraraka and I can both float, you know? And we have this friend in the support department that has hover equipment, so, obviously, we thought it would be beneficial to form a flying team, but we'd still be missing a member, assuming we can all place into the second exercise, and I was thinking that your quirk would be perfect. Dark Shadow, I mean you could attack or defend from any direction, including above and below, and it lets you go hands-free, so we thought it could work really well if you teamed up with us. What do you think? That's not what I was expecting, Tokoyami informed him honestly, but he wasn't saying no. Are you so sure there will be a team event? Well, sort of. I kind of taped every sports festival ever since I was big enough to watch. There's always something that tests teamwork. I mean, feel free to say no, I would totally understand. I just think your skills would fit really well with ours. Darechim. You may be right, Tokoyami said, folding his arms and tapping one bicep thoughtfully. Alright then. Should we all make it to that stage, I agree to team up with you. What is this friend of yours' name? Izuku let out a rattled laugh. Oh, well, not about that friend, just, be prepared. Izuku knew he should have probably been trying to move past things that had already happened, trying to forgive and forget, but he just didn't like being around Bakugo. He still remembered what the other boy had said about jumping off the roof. Bakugo didn't seem to, at all, ignoring him most of their days if he wasn't yelling at him. However, Izuku just couldn't get it out of his brain. Aizawa had said he didn't care where they sat, at one point, when Kaminari asked, wanting to switch his own seat, and Izuku had taken the excuse to sit elsewhere, instead of right behind his middle school bully. Usually he sat in between Momo and Ochako with Tenya on his side, or Tsuyu if they switched it up. And he still jumped whenever Bakugo made an explosion, too, which made him feel weak. Ochako was the only one who really noticed. Izuku tried very hard to keep it under wraps, after all, because he didn't want to make things harder for Bakugo than necessary or make a big deal out of it. Even still, she gave them frowns sometimes, clearly suspecting something was up, and had stopped using that nickname, they, even though she thought it was cute, when it became apparent there was some type of past between them. But she didn't ask after he said he didn't want to talk about it. Izuku appreciated that. Are you kidding? I'm so gonna win this fucking festival. He heard Kaken snort from somewhere ahead of them in the hall as they headed to lunch, and the familiar tone made him flinch. Bakugo wasn't even talking to him, but it sounded like every time he'd gloated in junior high and told Izuku that he would never make it. Ochako frowned at him. She didn't say anything, but she slipped her hand into his and gave it a squeeze. Izuku wouldn't admit it, but he was glad she did, and he held onto her hand until they got to the lunch line. It was nice, for once, to have someone be on his side. Hitoshi, on the other hand, took one look at Bakugo in the cafeteria and easily made the connection after seeing how Izuku acted around him. It was a mirror image of the bullies from his own previous schools, after all, who hadn't been scared enough by his quirk to leave him alone. He thought Bakugo was an a-hole, and said so, And even though Izuku always urged him to hush up, he couldn't help but think that was nice too. Someone being on his side, and willing to stand up for him, and liking him instead of Kaken. That guy is a effing a-hole. Someone who saw how Izuku felt. Who saw how Bakugo thought about him, even if Bakugo himself wasn't consciously doing anything. That was nice. I swear I tried this time. Kaminari groaned into his arms, folded over on his desk, bemoaning his fate of another paper graded with a bright blue D. Mike-sensei had a bunch of colored pens he used to grade, though he tried to avoid red, and he always left encouraging feedback and notes on even the worst of papers, but Izuku figured it must have been discouraging to have gotten 5 Ds in a row. The only reason Kaminari even got a D this time was because of the 5 bonus points Hisashi had given him because he'd clearly put a lot of effort in. "Mom's gonna kill me," Kaminari continued to mutter, so downtrodden Izuku had been planning on saying something before their teachers strolled over. "What's up, listener?" Kaminari lifted his head and grimaced. Mike-sensei looked at him with a friendly smile, and he held up his graded paper, looking somewhere between apologetic and guilty. "I'm sorry, sensei. I swear I tried." "Well, I could see that," Present Mike replied. "It was even longer than the word requirement this time. Have you thought about tutoring, my guy? It's not bad to have weaknesses. We're all strong at some things and less strong in others." "I've tried tutoring," Kaminari mumbled, which made Mike frown a little. "My last tutor said I was too stupid to help and left before she even got paid." "Well, that's not right," Mike said with pursed lips, planting his hands on his hips. "You are not stupid, and getting a few bad grades doesn't mean you aren't intelligent." Kaminari sighed. "How about you swing by the staff room with your draft next time so I can look it over before you turn it in?" Izuku could see Kaminari gnawing on his lower lip from his own seat. "I guess that it's just hard, you know? Sometimes I just can't find the words, or it gets all jumbled up in my head before I even finish my sentence." Izuku saw Present Mike pause. "Say, listener, have you ever seen anyone about your problems with writing? Seen anyone? No. How about this? Do you mix up letters and words sometimes, or have trouble remembering how they sound out loud? How about math? You have trouble there too. Yeah? How'd you know? It's not anything bad, listener, but I think it'll make learning easier on you. How about we take a trip to the school's counselor together?" It may not have been for him, but Izuku saw a teacher going out of his way to help a student, even got the sense Mike-sensei actually enjoyed reading their papers, with how excited his comments on them got, and every part of him appreciated it. Maybe his teachers, for once in his life, were all decent people, and he could trust them. There had been a student in his 5th grade class with undiagnosed dyslexia, and she'd had a tough time with practically all their assignments, because their teacher didn't care enough to even ask why she got a bad grade, but Mike-sensei, he cared. Shudo Todoroki was one person Izuku really hadn't talked to. Well, the boy didn't really talk to anyone, simply coming and going from class with his typical neutral expression, but it made Izuku feel a little bad. Pretty much everyone else in class had made friends, even Bakugo, who tolerated Kirishima and Mina even if he didn't even know their names. Izuku didn't want anyone to feel left out. That was why, after they'd been let out of school one afternoon, he made his way through the crowd of students outside with one of the popsicles he'd noticed Todoroki got from the vending machines and always ate discreetly. "Hey, Todoroki!" The boy paused, looking briefly surprised someone was talking to him, and turned around with a raised eyebrow. It was enough to make Izuku gulp. Man, he really is like a stone wall. "Here," he said cheerfully, holding out the frozen treat as Todoroki took it from him seemingly on reflex and frowned minutely. "I noticed you like these. Why'd you get me one?" Todoroki asked, confused frown still in place. Because you like them? But why? There's no reason to spend your own money on it," Todoroki countered, perturbed. Izuku honestly had no good answer. He just wanted to be friendly, and maybe make friends. "That I just want you to feel welcome, that's all." "Oh." Todoroki's face returned to normal, which meant he was showing nothing at all, and Izuku felt a bead of sweat trickle down his neck. "Thank you. However, you do not need to buy things for me." He didn't look thankful at all. He didn't look mad either, but still. "Well, I know I don't need to, but it's just a friendly gesture." I appreciate it, but it's unnecessary, Todoroki told him, like his words were practiced, and started walking again. I'm not here to make friends. There was a low whistle as Hitoshi passed him, at first going unnoticed by him, but the sound made Todoroki pause again and glance back, a small furrow in his brow as Hitoshi merely grinned dully and went, "Boy, that's not the thing to say." Izuku refrained from rolling his eyes with a small huff. "Shut up," he muttered as Hitoshi snickered, falling into step beside him as they headed out, going a different way than Todoroki did. He didn't really feel like he'd accomplished much, but still, he wanted to try. "If you're picking up on some battered kid syndrome, you're probably right, so am I," Hitoshi said, casually, always lackadaisical about that kind of thing, and Izuku actually slapped his forehead this time. He let out a sigh that made Hitoshi snicker at him again. "I'm telling you, the answer is 88.626, not 88.625, Tenya ranted, hand chopping thin air. "Because of the factor of dash." Izuku resisted the urge to groan and slam his head into the table as Tenya and Momo debated the tiniest detail of the last problem on their algebra sheet. He didn't think it really mattered, couldn't they just leave it at 88.62? But he knew saying that would just stir the fires of their argument even more. "I disagree," Momo said, twirling her pencil in hand as she started on her own explanation. Tenya's glasses shone in the light as he sat there with folded arms, a thoughtful frown on his face as he considered what she was saying. Izuku saw ectoplasm staring at them from the teacher's podium with a hesitant grimace on his face. He didn't really fault him for it. Anyone would have been intimidated by the thought of trying to break up one of Tenya's and Momo's great math debates. Ochako ummed beside him. "Guys, why don't we just round it?" "It's important to be precise, Ochako," Tenya exclaimed with another wave of his hand. "What if this were a matter of life or death?" "Pretty sure math is never going to be," Ochako mumbled. Izuku's eyes lingered on Todoroki across the room. He was sitting by himself, staring blankly as he did his work, like usual. "Izuku? Is everything all right?" He looked up and saw Momo peering at him. They'd all turned their desks into a circle to work together, and she sat directly across from him. He sighed. "I just feel a little bad," he admitted. "I feel like Todoroki is kind of lonely. I want to make friends with him, but I don't really know how." Tenya glanced across the room and frowned, adjusting his glasses. "Well, that is an admirable goal, but you cannot fault yourself if he isn't responsive. I am sure he will loosen up as the semester continues." "Yeah, maybe so," Momo agreed. "I think people from families like his can just feel distanced for a while, but I think he'll take a liking to the class after a bit more time." "Yeah, I guess," Izuku sighed and glanced at the clock. Only a few more minutes left to listen to their math problem woes. Still, for a few moments, he could see his words were bouncing around in all their brains as they sat there in silence. He hoped Todoroki did feel more welcomed as time went on. That actually, it surely wouldn't hurt to try and learn more about him to help make him feel more welcomed, would it? Izuku made a mental note to try and do just that when he went home. It may have to wait after the sports festival, only a week away, as he and Ochako had been training together for several hours after school now to prepare, but he would get around to it. "So this is Class 1A, was the first thing Hitoshi said when he peered into their room. "I heard you guys were impressive, but you just sound like an but. Is everyone in the hero course delusional, or just you?" Izuku was honestly torn between screaming out a laugh, squeaking, and frantically telling Hitoshi to shut up, so he settled on covering his mouth and breathing heavily into it while waving one hand. He ended up saying nothing, merely watching Bakugo leave in a huff, while Hitoshi headed out after just leaving a vaguely ominous impression on the rest of the class. Classic Hitoshi, if he was going to be honest. He was picking up more of Aizawa-sensei's behavior than he would admit. That Friday came sooner than he expected, as he and Ochako practiced their floating and he had a few spars with Tokoyami to give him some rudimentary hand-to-hand knowledge in case they needed to fight to reach each other. Before he knew it, though, he was standing and listening to Midnight announce for them, being all jovial for the cameras, and he felt a shiver go down his spine. There were so many people up in the stands. And of course Kaken had to walk up and make some big announcement that he would win and make them a target for everyone there. Izuku found himself wincing as other students booed, and ignored the concerned frown Ochako gave him. The first event will be a race. Midnight yelled, waving her whip like it was a flag. All students, get into position. Focus. A race. That was good. It meant no one would be fighting each other, though interfering may still be in the picture, and as long as they all made it. Breathe in. They were at the starting line now. Breathe out. All of them tense and ready. Breathe in. Start. Midnight howled, a buzzer going off. Almost immediately, Todoroki shot off to the front of the crowd as ice covered the ground at his feet. Most of the other students let out surprised squawks and cries of indignation as they tried to move their feet, but Izuku had seen that familiar sparkle ahead and known what was coming. He pushed off from the ground as hard as he could, catapulting himself through the air, and twisted as he did, sending 2 black tendrils out as far as he could. Ochako and Tokoyami didn't even need him to yell. They hadn't known what kind of event they'd be facing, so they hadn't been able to make concrete plans, but they'd all agreed to help each other if they could. Tokoyami pushed off with the help of Dark Shadow, and Ochako followed behind, floating into the sky, and they grabbed a hold of his extensions of Blackwhip. Perfect, Izuku thought, turning back around and holding onto the main tendril with his other hand. He pushed himself forward, subtly, with float, not wanting to let on that he could fly yet, and looked for a spot to land. Look at that, folks! Mike screamed over the loudspeakers. Todoroki comes out with a strong start, but it looks like 3 of our hero hopefuls have already got a plan in store. As if fate was helping him out, with a large burst of smoke several of the giant robot models from the entrance exam exited out onto the field, giving him the perfect landing point. Izuku came down on the shoulder of one, pulling Tokoyami and Ochako down, and let go of them. They each took off, scrambling across the robots, too large and unwieldy to do anything about a few small students on their heads, while the students behind them in the race tried to figure out a way past. He activated full cowling as he went, leaping from one robot to the next, and the trio converged at the edge of the last one. Ochako folded her hands together and formed a concentrated expression, before placing a hand on Tokoyami, making them both weightless for Izuku to grab onto and leap with. He went sailing ahead, landing safely with them, and they pressed forward to the next obstacle. Deku, he heard in the distance, no doubt Kaken upset by his early lead, and it made him wince. Well done. The students are making their way past the villain bots. And it looks like Midoriya, Uraraka, and Tokoyami have formed an unspoken alliance. Who would have guessed? Izuku caught Todoroki glancing back at them with narrowed eyes. Gulping, he decided to just focus on getting past the tight ropes. Making herself weightless, Ochako went bounding across one, subtly giving herself enough weight back to come bouncing back down but not enough to make the line waver too much. Midoriya, here. Tokoyami called out, dark shadows snaking over to him. Izuku took a running start and jumped, bouncing easily off of the other boy's quirk creature and sailing over one of the chasms. He reached back with Blackwhip to take Tokoyami with him, and that was how they went across the second obstacle. By now, other students were starting to catch up. He could see Mei soaring above them with a laugh that echoed around the whole arena. He could also still hear Bakugo yelling and letting off explosions, which didn't do much for his peace of mind, but he tried to ignore it. He hit the ground running when they came to the minefield area. They were close enough now that he had to be confident Ochako and Tokoyami could make it on their own. He had to make sure he didn't fall behind, as he was integral to how they would maneuver in the air. Instantly, however, he noticed something. The mines were laid out close enough together that running across wouldn't work, and it slowed everyone down, though Todoroki was icing his way across, and as he came to a stop, students started to streak past him. A loud explosion near his ear startled him quite badly. Bakugo screamed past him, mouth open in a wordless shout, and he flinched. Take that, Deku. Go right ahead, Izuku thought, eyeing him for just a moment before he started to dig with a part of Blackwhip formed into a roughly shovel-shaped blob. If you want first so bad, Kaken. He started to dig up the mines. Might as well take a leaf from Bakugo's notebook and blast right to the front. When he had a big enough pile, he let some of the black energy out and into a larger blob to shield him, and he jumped right onto it. Whew! Present Mike screamed as he went soaring, shooting past all the competitors. Midoriya comes up fast on those in the lead dash. He slammed the tendril of Blackwhip down, right in between those two idiots who had nothing but the finish line in mind, and set off an explosion that made both Bakugo and Todoroki pause. Full cowling crackled into existence and he ran. Du dash. Midoriya is nearing the finish. Who will come in first? Closer, closer dash. Izuku came out of the tunnel and stopped inches from the finish line. Bakugo was screaming his name when he came soaring out, eyes going wide when he realized who he'd been focused on was just standing there, and Izuku took a leisurely step across the finish line, smiling. "Huh," Mike screeched. "Are my eyes working?" Midoriya just came in second, on purpose. "Eraser, what is up with your kiddo?" He made a rational deduction, which other students might have noticed if they thought about anything other than coming in first. Aizawa's dry voice replied, sounding both tired and annoyed but also a little proud. It made warmth blossom in Izuku's chest. "Bakugo places first." Midnight yelled into her mic, waving her whip. Bakugo himself had come to a stop, and he'd turned, and it was the first time Izuku had ever seen him look more confused than angry. When Midnight said that whoever came in first got a 10 million point headband, the students around him, all still confused as to why he'd willingly given up a first-place spot, started murmuring to themselves and each other. Izuku spotted a few people from 1B looking at him, looking both perturbed and curious, and he'd seemed to catch the gaze of a familiar-looking blonde boy, who looked caught between impressed and a little insulted, for some reason. "How did he know?" someone whispered, followed up by another voice saying, "I think he knows everything." "You knew this would happen, didn't you, eh?" Bakugo yelled from across the arena, being restrained by Kirishima and practically smoking. No, he was literally smoking, that was literal smoke coming from his hands. "You did this on purpose, didn't you?" "BSD. Gee, he's pleasant," Mei said cheerfully, adjusting the jetpack she'd put on Tokoyami. "Now then," Midnight yelled. "Form your teams." The four of them were clustered together off to the side, on their own, clearly a team already. Mei hadn't even waited to start getting her equipment ready. She gave Ochako hover boots and Tokoyami a jetpack to support him just in case they all had to let go of him. Izuku again caught several fearful glances being thrown their way. He really didn't understand why. It wasn't that hard to guess what was going to happen during the festival and plan for it. Honestly, he was a little disappointed with some of the students' ingenuity. "All right, you got it?" "I believe so," Tokoyami answered Mei with a nod, placing his hand on a button on his pack. "This is to activate it, this is for a general hover, this one activates the power for a boost, and this for the emergency parachute." "Perfect. We're good to go." Everyone around them had split off by now. Izuku spotted Tenya and Momo with Todoroki, and he had to restrain a smile. Maybe he was warming up to others, if he was willing to work with them. 1, 2, 3, he up. Ochako said cheerily as they boosted Tokoyami to sit on their shoulders. He joined a hand with Ochako, and felt a warmness spread through him. Kaken didn't matter, he told himself. He had friends now, real ones, and that was what mattered. They could do this. "Teams, assemble." Midnight yelled. "Get ready. On my count." Ochako squeezed his hand. It was a little embarrassing, but Izuku had gotten rather attached to her in a short amount of time. She could probably comfort him better than anyone other than his mother. 1. That warm feeling spread to his hand. It was just the adrenaline, he figured, and Ochako's body heat mingling with his. 2. He'd never actually held hands with anyone before Yue. His thumb was brushing against Tokoyami's ankle, solidly in their grip, and the boy's skin was cool. "Start." Tokoyami pressed the power trigger. They shot into the air with a whir, Mei letting out a loud howl as they did, her own hover boots and Ochako's activating in sync. A pink glow spread down Ochako's arm, over to him, over to Mei where Ochako's other hand was touching her, up to Tokoyami. Ochako let out a laugh as they shot high into the sky. The people in the stands, not expecting them to gain altitude so quickly, let out sounds of surprise, leaning back in their seats even though their team was still squarely in the arena airspace. "This is amazing," she yelled. "I feel so light, like I could float anything. It really did feel effortless. Her extra training must have been paying off. Little did she know, it wasn't just her extra training, but they would all find that out in time. Izuku glanced down at where the other teams were gaping up at them and grinned. "Who?" Mike screamed. Izuku had to look down to see the announcer's booth. Team Tokoyami with a strong start again. "Looks like Uraraka's been training hard with her quirk." Ochako beamed. Izuku found himself smiling too, thinking that they could, theoretically, simply stay up there with their added headbands and still place into the final round. They weren't going to, of course, but still. They could in theory. He heard a vague fang Deku down below. Bakugo was already blasting off, targeting Todoroki's team, and it quickly devolved into chaos. The people on the ground were first priority. No one thought they were going to come back down, since they could fly. That was their first mistake. The second was starting to ignore them because they were in the air. Out of sight, out of mind. "All right, Ochako, start a descent," Izuku instructed, feeling a thrill run through him. He helped to support and guide them as they went, slowly and carefully. Even present Mike was busy commentating on the other team's action. Izuku idly looked around for Hitoshi, wondering where he'd gotten off to, but he couldn't spot him in the fray. Oh well, the boy was very good at hiding in plain sight. His eyes fell on Bakugo as he came crashing back down into his team's arms after an unsuccessful lunge at Todoroki. "You guys ready?" Izuku asked, referring to this part of the plan they discussed while they got ready. "Ready and hoping this doesn't backfire." Ochako returned happily. "Go get him, Tiger." May chirped. Tokoyami nodded solemnly. "All right, I'm letting go." Then he detached, floating in midair, and felt his cheeks warm when part of the audience shouted in delight. "And what's this? Team Tokoyami just lost a member, and I don't mean by falling. Midoriya is flying, folks. Just how many powers does he have?" "His quirk is a source of energy," Aizawa, blessedly, cut in, saving him from too much scrutiny. "It allows him to spread it throughout his body, concentrate it into tangible forms, or radiate it from him in such a manner he can float." Just floating, as the name suggested, had become easy by now. Actually flying was a little trickier. Even still, Izuku had set it up so he had a straight shot, didn't have to make any complicated turns, and only needed high speed for 2 runs. He could go fast, very fast, if it was just in one direction. He lined it up, activated full cowling, aimed, and was off like the bullet from a gun. Isunji passed Bakugo, and stealing the 10 million point band right off his head. The crowd screamed. Bakugo turned, as if in slow motion, watching him with wide eyes, and Izuku couldn't contain a wide grin as he held that coveted headband in his own hand. He didn't stop, however, merely paused and then shot upward, blocking Kyuka's earphone jacks and vines that came up from the ground to try and catch him with Blackwhip combined with full cowling. He flew too high for anyone to reach, again, and then started making his way back to where his team was hovering. Holy smokes, folks! Midoriya of Team Tokoyami just stole the 10 million pointer out of Team Bakugo's grasp. Mental high five, Zuku, mental high five. May yelled, busy with holding onto Tokoyami, grinning like a shark at him. He floated up and fitted the headband around a smiling Tokoyami's neck. What a mad banquet of darkness. Izuku let out a giggle as he slotted himself back into place. The warmth in his hand returned. Ochako let out a small sigh, as if floating had become a little bit easier. He turned his eyes to Bakugo. It had been a stupid thing to do, he knew, stealing from Bakugo, but they needed that headband. They couldn't just hover in the air the entire time. They had to show off, had to show they had drive and a competitive spirit. The other boy was standing there, like a statue, or perhaps a pot getting ready to boil over, as there was steam rising from his palms as his body shook. Kirishima looked concerned, head tilted back to look at him, then he yelped and nearly undid their formation when Bakugo let out 2 identical explosions and screamed. "I'll kill you. I'm coming for you." "We've got half the time left," Ochako said, sounding a little worried as she eyed the explosive student below them. She knew Bakugo was loud, but how he was acting now seemed way over the top. Especially since he was supposed to be childhood friends with Izuku. I don't think he likes Izuku that much. Not at all. And she'd known that for a while, but she hadn't thought he didn't like him enough to actually want to hurt him. Now, she wasn't so sure. It'll be fine, Izuku assured, trying to sound confident. He pulled them to the side to dodge an attack from a 1B team, knowing Ochako couldn't guide them quickly enough. Every so often, someone did make an attempt to get them out of the air, but they failed each time, either because they dodged it or Dark Shadow defended them. Izuku had been right, Tokoyami had the absolute perfect quirk for their team. Dark Shadow was ideal for defending from below. It might have just been the adrenaline, but he seemed larger, able to go farther, more vicious, somehow. Maybe it was just Izuku's imagination. He adjusted the grip he had on Tokoyami's ankle. "Du!" Bakugo screamed at one point, using his explosions to vault his way towards them, but Dark Shadow screamed and barreled into him head-on, barely flinching when it got an explosion to the face. Even Todoroki tried to get at them at one point, but he must have realized it was futile, as he didn't try again. Things continued that way until the end bell sounded. Ochako and Mei looked happy when they descended to the ground and started to mingle. Dark Shadow seemed content as well, as he refused to stop nuzzling into Izuku's neck for a solid minute while Tokoyami hissed at him to stop in embarrassment. Izuku could see Bakugo across the arena, glaring at him with the passion of 1,000 suns, though his team was clustered around him, probably convincing him not to start something and get kicked out. Even Mike was surprised that Hitoshi's team had passed. Izuku hadn't noticed him gaining points, but he had on that typical Aizawa-like smug grin, while his teammates looked confused and jarred. Izuku rolled his eyes at that. "Good luck in the next round, to all of you," Tokoyami said as they stood there on the grass, getting ready to file inside for a short break before a tournament round started. "Though I understand the point of it, I still find it disappointing in a way. We cannot fight together the entire time." "Ah, you too, Tokoyami," Ochako gushed, making him look away with a look that seemed like he'd be blushing if Izuku could see his skin. Izuku stuck close to her side as they headed in. Somehow, he didn't want to get caught alone with Bakugo at any point in the next 3 days. Of course he got stuck with fighting Hitoshi first. "Midoriya, be careful with him," Ojiro whispered to him beforehand. "If you answer any of his questions, he'll have control over you." Yeah, I know," Izuku replied, confused. "I know him, that he's like one of my best friends?" Ojiro just stared at him in response. Then he turned and crept away from him. "Go easy on me, OP." Hitoshi mocked him with a grin, stretching out his arms. Izuku rolled his eyes in response. "Begin," Midnight yelled. Hitoshi came at him with surprising speed. Their silent agreement to a competition meant Izuku didn't activate his quirk, only lowered himself into a defensive stance and twisted around his first attack. They both wanted to see who would win with no quirks. He got a feeling the crowd was surprised as they started to fight, using only hand-to-hand skills, bouncing around the arena like two ball in a pinball machine. Hitoshi managed to toss him at one point, but he landed on his feet, lunging and taking out the other boy's legs directly after. They rolled, and Hitoshi got him off with a kick to the face that left his chin bleeding. He jumped in again and went for a strike to Hitoshi's kneecaps, only to be blocked and thrown to the side. He got in a good kick to Hitoshi's ribs that sent him reeling for a minute, but it was followed up by a strike that barely missed his collarbone a moment later. It was feral, frankly, and a little frightening to some of those watching who'd been expecting a flashier fight with less grittiness and blood. And Midoriya and Shinso start off with a vicious hand-to-hand fight. Who would have guessed they were so evenly matched? And it seems Midoriya is as light on his feet without his quirk as he is with it. Eraserhead, I've been told you've given some approved tutoring to them both. Who'd you have your money on to win? Neither. The winner should feel accomplished but not cocky enough to lose progress. The loser should just take this as another lesson moving forward. What a boring teacher response. Aizawa's hilarious offended growl after that almost made Izuku trip up. Hitoshi grinned at him, knowing they were probably pissing off Bakugo more, and broke a tile in half where one of his kicks landed. "Aren't you the one who called me a terrible teacher?" That was then, this is now. And right now, neither seems to be giving and both seem determined to rip the other's face off. "What have you been teaching them, Eraser?" Izuku broke and let out a little laugh. Hitoshi shot forward and nailed him in the gut, then flipped him over his shoulder, and Izuku realized in a brief moment of panic he was about to go sailing off the side. He stopped a few inches from the grass. Then he floated back into the arena bounds. "I win," Hitoshi called over to him, stretching his neck as he smirked and circled back over to him. "You broke first." Izuku stuck his tongue out at him. "In that case," he said, and activated full cowling. Instantly, Hitoshi's eyes widened in an "oh shit" gesture. He put up a pretty good fight comparatively, but it still took less than a minute for Izuku to push him out of bounds with full cowling active. He technically won, but he still felt frustrated he hadn't won their real fight. He walked over and held out his hand to help Hitoshi up afterwards, getting an eye roll in response as Aizawa continued to bicker overhead. They headed for the stands together, silently agreeing they now had bait to mock their teacher over. The matches went as expected afterwards. Todoroki was obviously going to win his fight with Shiro. Kaminari was too unpracticed, and Shiozaki had a quirk effective against his. Mei's performance was easy to predict. Tenya should have never let her deck him out in her gear. Aoyama was also very inexperienced when it came to hand-to-hand fighting, so Mina winning wasn't surprising. Now, Momo did have a useful quirk, but Dark Shadow was just too pumped up from the previous round and strong for her to counter well enough. Kirishima and Tetsu had such similar quirks that just beating each other up was the only thing that could have happened. Izuku didn't notice, but the faces of those who didn't know him well around him got more and more nervous as the matches went on. He didn't know it, but it was because of him. How he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, every little detail and calculation that flitted into his brain, how precisely he measured how the matches would go, how every one of his predictions came true. How he seemed to know about quirks even from other classes. How he knew the names of people he'd never met or spoken to before. How he knew exactly the right strategy to take, and how he theorized out loud about how someone could have won despite the odds. Coupled with his performance, showing off just how many powers he had, SRNG across the obstacle course like it was as easy as a light jog, his impressive speed in the air, his vicious fight with Hitoshi showing he didn't even need his quirk to fight, including, to those eyes sharp enough to see it, the fact he was trying to hold back. It was all a little terrifying. Even if he wasn't completely refined, his potential was showing, and it was great. The blonde from earlier peeked over the partition separating Class A and B and looked about to say something before staring at him ranting for a while and slowly easing back down. It was almost 1 o'clock, and predictably, the last match of the first round came up on screen, keeping to schedule. He glanced up and felt his heart drop into his stomach. He glanced quickly at Ochako, who looked quite pensive, and at Bakugo, who sat at the very end of the row, farthest away from him, looking stormy. He may have qualified for the third round, but he still wasn't happy about how it had happened. The screen said Ochako and Bakugo were up next. He whipped back around to look at his friend. He muttered, anxious. "Be careful." Ochako stood up from her seat and looked down at him with an oddly determined expression. "I'll be fine," she said, emphatic, and turned to march down to the arena. I'll beat him so Izuku doesn't have to." 12:57 p.m. Nedzuo. Nedzuo. Nedzu. My man. My guy. My super pal. Respected god on earth among petty mortals. "Come on Nedzu, I'm watching the sports festival. You won't answer you are favorite number 3? You didn't tell me you have a flying student this year. Come on, how often do we get students who can fly? And go at those speeds? And aren't dumb? I'll tell you for you, almost never. Come on Neds, I want him. I know you are just sitting in your office drinking leaf water right now. Please? Can I finally have a whittle in turn? Please? I swear I'm responsible. Okay, I get it, I'm being too pushy. I get it. But I'll send my offer in triplicate just in case. It would be great publicity. Smiley face. 2:28 p.m. Nedzu, oh my god, please, did you see that on TV? Sometime after. Yay hell space. Present Lunchables. I think Midoriya almost cried when All Might hugged him. 12. I thought it was cute, smiley face. Rated R for all audiences. I was closest. Smiley face. I saw a shimmer. Smiley face. It was adorable. Smiley face. I got a picture. Smiley face. Mummy man, stop embarrassing my student where he can't hear. Present Lunchables, you just said it he can't? Hear? Mummy man, but he knows. Don't you see him cringing? Rated R for all audiences. That's so cute you know things like that. Mummy man, shut up. Cementos, it was rather wholesome. However, I also noticed that moment where he tripped in his fight with young Shinso was when you were teasing Aizawa, Yamada. I was sitting at such an angle I could see him laugh. I think they were both rather amused. Smiley face. Present Lunchables. Mummy man, I can't wait until I can get out of this FNG speaker box hell with you. Snipe. I overheard them talking in the stands. I think no one recognized me due to me not wearing my mask. Midoriya was rather disappointed Shinso couldn't use his capture weapon, because he would have looked just like Aizawa-sensei, which would have been so cool. Shinso was amicably jealous Midoriya has one built in. Is that what the kids call mini-me? Mummy man, hate. Present Lunchables. Haha, he just tossed his phone on the floor and put his head on the desk up here. Rated R for all audiences. Hey at all might get in here and look at these pics. Rated R for all audiences sent 4 attachments. 12. That's adorable. Rated R for all audiences. How can he be so scary and so cute simultaneously? So my power loader, I'll look at the little sprout. Sure you don't have a secret kid All Might? Rated R for all audiences. Secret? What do you mean? He and Aizawa are clearly co-parenting. All Might, please. Snipe, how does custody work here? All Might, Mr. Snipe. Present Lunchables. I'm saying 60-40 for Aizawa because he's more responsible. Rated R for all audiences. That's fair. Overlord, please do carry on with bullying All Might and Aizawa. But please note I'd like a faculty meeting at 6 tonight to discuss a possible transfer into the hero course. In case you were wondering, it's Aizawa's other child in question. Smiley face. Rated R for all audiences. What about custody for that one? Present Lunchables. 100 because he barely speaks to any other teachers and his foster home isn't much. Rated R for all audiences. How do you know that? Present Lunchables. I'm the English teacher. People tell me everything. Mummy man, would you all please stop bombing my phone already? Mummy man, wait, what do you mean by his foster home isn't much? Present Lunchables. He just said he wasn't happy there and his folks don't pay him much attention. Mummy man, and why didn't you inform me of this sooner? Present Lunchables. Calm down dude, I just learned this yesterday. It was during a talk about why fairy tales SCK because they give you false expectations about life. Rated R for all audiences. In real life adoption incoming the joke is becoming reality. Overlord, I advise against talking of such matters further in the faculty chat room for legal reasons, but please do come see me, Yamada, Aizawa, after the festivities have finished. Present Lunchables. Yes, Overlord chapter text. Ochako knew, as she walked down to the arena, that she was pretty much screwed. Bakugo was probably the worst possible match to get out of everyone there. It was just her luck that she was the first person to get him as an opponent. And he'd had all this time to rest up too after the cavalry battle. He was stronger than her, smart, and had a better quirk for fighting, so really, all the odds were stacked against her. Some part of her brain was aware it looked as if she had no conceivable way of winning. A smaller, more conniving part that sounded suspiciously like Izuku told her there was always a way to win. He had traced out a way every student so far could have won their matches. Raw power, that wasn't the only thing that mattered. If she could be like Izuku, if she could outsmart Bakugo, she could win. She knew she could. She had to. Maybe she wouldn't have felt as calm and determined as she did as she stepped up onto the stage if it weren't for Izuku. A giant chunk of her was screaming out at her to just keep Bakugo away from him, even though she knew Izuku was strong and knew he could handle himself. She had noticed every time he winced or got nervous or became quiet because of Bakugo, noticed every time he retreated back into his shell because of the other boy. So what if Izuku could take a punch and dish it out too? That part of her insisting she protect her friend said there were things more important than fighting, things like people's feelings. He's just so mean to him for no reason. Izuku had stood up for her and the other girls when Minetta mistreated them. She wanted to stand up for her friend too. He just looks down on him and calls him that stupid nickname. She was there. She saw it. How could she just ignore it? Maybe she had decided to become a hero for the income, but how could she even dare to call herself one if she didn't protect her friend's feelings? She couldn't fail. She couldn't allow Bakugo into the next round. She couldn't allow him to fight Izuku in the matches. Bully. 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 If no one else would, Ochako would protect her friend. A lot of things slotted into place in the space of a moment when Midnight dropped her whip and called for the match to start, and Bakugo narrowed his eyes at her and got ready to fight. Bully. It all made sense. A rush of pure rage overpowered any lingering fears she had. She sprinted forward, a scowl set deep into her face, and kept low to the ground, hands out. I won't let him hurt Izuku ever again. Bakugo blasted her back. She had been expecting it, and rolled on her landing like Aizawa had taught her while she trained with him and Izuku to soften the blow. And so she did, again and again and again, while Bakugo never noticed the rubble floating away in the dust. Seriously, come on, a voice yelling in the stands shouted. Don't let him bully the poor girl. Ochako nearly screamed then and there. I'm not the one he bullied. How could no one have ever seen? How could they look at a match and feel sorry for her just because she was a girl and no one had ever saved Izuku from him before? The voice of her sensei came over the speakers to chastise the pro who'd yelled. She barely heard him, rushing at Bakugo and hardly feeling the bruises as they piled up. I won't let you through to him. Ha! Bakugo sent her sailing back with an open palm, glaring at her like she'd personally insulted him. Gonna have to try something else, round face? Twitching, Ochako stood up and took a few deep breaths, placing her hands together. Bakugo tensed up, eyeing them. That was another disadvantage. He was taking her seriously. If he'd been as emotional as he was during the cavalry battle, he might have been easier to catch off guard, but he was watching for any little move she made. She supposed she might have been proud of the fact she'd garnered that reaction to him in other circumstances, but right now, all she could think of was how mad she was. A voice of reason, however, cut through the anger, sharpening it into a fine weapon. She couldn't beat Bakugo physically, not the way she was now. So she would have to make him angry enough to lose this newfound composure of his. She just needed the right moment. Eat this then, she bit out, and let all the rubble fall. People in the stands started to shout in surprise. Predictably, Bakugo looked up, and Ochako made her sacrificing move. It was what Izuku called it when he played chess with Shoji and said he had to make a sacrifice to distract the other player and make them underestimate him long enough so he could win. This sacrificing move was going to hurt, but it was worth it. With a yell, she charged, and the resulting explosion from Bakugo blowing the rock away sent her slamming back into the arena tiles. The audience was totally silent. She could hear Bakugo breathing heavily, see him holding his right wrist, and a tiny part of her crowed in victory. Not yet. Wiping dust from her mouth, she panted as she got to her feet and glared across the arena at him. Well, he finally said, after a few moments of the dust clearing, looks like you're serious, round face. You wanna go? He looked up at her with a crooked, wild grin and she glared harder. You don't deserve it. His expression dropped in surprise. He didn't know what she meant. Louder, though not so loud anyone in the stands would hear, she put a growl into her voice. You don't deserve to win. You're a bully and a cheat. You don't deserve to even be here. You know who does? Deku. He's better than you in every way, he's smarter, more kind, and he's beaten you all the way here. He let you win. He'll become a better hero than you ever will. Bakugo's eyes widened, almost comically, and she could see his jaw trembling. Her ranting, from his point of view, must have been coming out of left field, completely unexpected. He probably thought no one knew what he'd done. That no one had noticed. That no one liked Izuku enough to see it. Well, he was... Bakugo's face contorted into an ugly scowl. Shut, he said, falling into a crouch. The hell dash, he took off at a run, full speed, and reared back with his right hand. Kakken always starts with a big right swing. Up. Ochako was hurting all over and tired and low on energy, but she wasn't done yet. She still had enough for this part. You shut the hell up, she screamed back, reaching into her pocket as she burst into a sprint, withdrawing some few precious pebbles she'd stored away and rearing back with her arm. Even in his anger, Bakugo's eyes widened again for a brief moment when she moved, not knowing what she was doing, and he broke out of his rage-induced lunge just enough that her momentum could overpower his. A loud, long scream exited her throat as she threw herself into him full force. She ducked under his arm, wrapping her arms around him, and in that brief moment where he'd broken and come at her without his defenses, gotten the opportunity to put him into a chokehold Aizawa had shown her. In another life, she may not have been strong enough to hold him, but in this one, the anger rushing through her veins refused to let her let go. Holy smokes! Mike-sensei yelled out over the speaker. That's an arm triangle choke hold she's got him in, folks. The arm she has pressing on his carotid is cutting off his oxygen flow. Hell dash, she heard Bakugo wheezing, his body struggling beneath her. But his good arm was trapped in the air between them. He couldn't bend it far enough to explode her, and she knew he couldn't make another big explosion with his right. I'm not letting you go forward. Ochako yelled, pressing her eyes shut and holding on tighter as he wriggled and started to wheeze, scrambling at her clothes to try and get purchase. He tried to start up an explosion in his palm, but it was too small, and she barely felt it scorch her skin. He resorted to punching her in the ribs, weaker than he usually would have been able to, growing weaker by the second. It hurt, but she held on. I won't let you hurt him. His name is Izuku. Uraraka has Bakugo in a SBMSSV hold. Midnight yelled, counting down from 10-, 9-, 8-. Hold on. Just hold on. 7-, 6-, 5-. Ochako's body was screaming at her. She was near giving out. But she could not, absolutely would not let him fight Izuku here today. 4-, 3-, 2-. I'll protect him no matter what. Uraraka wins the match. Ochako let go and rolled off him, panting in relief as she curled up on the tiles. A few feet away, Bakugo, who'd started to turn purple, wheezed for air as he grasped at his throat and laid there with a stunned look on his face. I won. I won. I beat him. Yee-hee. A victory for Uraraka, folks. There were tears stinging her eyes as she slowly got up. Midnight was already jogging over to them, looking concerned, but Ochako only had eyes for the face she was searching for in the stands. She saw him, then Izuku, staring down at her with wide eyes and looking somewhere in between shocked and scared and proud and impressed, tears starting to leak out of his eyes. She raised a weak, shaky fist, smiling through her own. Izuku's face twisted, and he rocked out of his seat, freely crying as he put his against his chest. Izuku, I did it. It was a good thing Midnight had come over, because she would have eaten it on the concrete if the woman hadn't been there to catch her. The crowd was eating the matchup. The underdog girl had won after all, against the odds, and they were screaming for Ochako as Izuku ran to the stairwell and started making his way down to the area underneath the seating where the medic room was. She had done that for him. She wanted to win, obviously, wanted to prove herself, but she'd been so determined for him, he just knew it somehow, deep down. No one had ever done anything like that for him. Ochako had beaten Kaken, for him, to make sure he wouldn't have to face Kaken here today, something he'd been dreading in his gut and trying to ignore. He couldn't help but cry all the way there. By the time he made it to the room Recovery Girl was inhabiting for the length of the matches, Ochako was already lying on one of the cots with a more peaceful look on her face. She jumped when the door flew open, but lit up when she saw him, sitting up even if it made her wince. Izuku! Izuku didn't say a word, just lunged at her and hugged her, clenching his teeth to try and stem his flow of tears. She sniffled, returning the hug with less of her usual strength, and Recovery Girl watched them with a fond sigh. Thank you, he whispered, voice broken and uneven. Thank you so much. It's okay, Izuku, she whispered back. You're my friend. I'm going to protect you just as much as you protect me. If that made him cry harder, she just gave him an affectionate pat to the head and didn't say anything. F off. Izuku didn't know who Bakugo was yelling at, but he hid behind a door as the steaming boy went storming out of the hall. Then he had the misfortune of passing Endeavor in the hall. That man just creeped him out, for some reason, and passed him as quickly as he could. All he wanted was to get to his match in peace, but even Todoroki himself wouldn't let him, as he met him in the tunnel before they ever got to the arena. "I noticed something," the other boy said, making Izuku start to sweat under his frozen gaze. "That power of yours. When you use it to hit things, it's an awful lot like All Might's." Endeavor had said that too. Izuku had just snapped out a short "I'm not All Might, and Todoroki isn't you" and left. Are you his secret love child or something? That was, in practical terms, the moment he couldn't take Shudo seriously anymore, speaking in terms of their entire relationship. What? Are you related somehow? Is that why he gives you special attention? That's ridiculous, Izuku stammered out, wondering if Todoroki was actually brooding most of the time or if he was actually just having thoughts like these. And besides, what's up with your father, and his weird thing about you surpassing All Might? Shudo's face darkened, and he proceeded to tell him a story that he apparently wasn't too disturbed by but Izuku found sickening. That was when he decided he was going to get Endeavor arrested. Todoroki was pretty much stone-faced all the way up to their match after that. When it started, however, he narrowed his eyes and let out a gigantic blast of ice, and Izuku punched it into smithereens. The boys' eyes widened for a moment. Izuku wasn't sure if he was taken off guard or thinking further about his insane all-might love child theory. Either way, he propelled himself forward and started a dangerous battle of striking ice spears that left sharp icicles all over the arena floor. Sometimes he used float or Blackwhip to dodge, darting around the edges of the ring like a ping-pong ball until there was ice on all sides. He has to use his fire, he thought, eyeing the frost creeping up Shudo's body. He has to realize it's okay. But with him watching, he was determined to help Shudo now, just like Ochako had helped him. Izuku wasn't leaving anyone behind. He threw himself into a spin and glided along the edge of an ice wall. He hadn't just been bouncing around at random. He had made his movements precise and deliberate, purposefully baiting Shudo into icing certain areas, and they were practically encased by now. The ice stretched too high for any of the cameras to get a good view. "You aren't going to beat me this way," he yelled down from a perch on a spear of ice, electricity crackling around his body and helping keep his temperature up. Shudo turned to squint up at him. "You have to use your fire. It's yours, Todoroki, not his. It's your power. Don't you get it?" He raised both hands, letting Blackwhip surround them until he'd formed a bludgeon, and leapt down too fast for the ice to follow him. "You can do so many great things with it that he'll never even dream of." Shudo's eyes widened. Izuku was coming in fast, already too close to hit with a large attack, and his improvised weapon was closing in. Shudo had started to tire as well, and Izuku could see it. "Use it," he yelled, catching Shudo in the shoulder and sending him flying. "Use it for what you want to do, not what he wants." "What do you want, Todoroki?" He stood there and watched as Shudo took a hard landing and let out a gasp, shivering once as he crawled his way to his feet, nearly slipping on the amount of ice coating the floor. He looked back up at Izuku with wide eyes and an almost haunted expression. Neither of them were moving, and he found himself speaking. I want to be a hero." Izuku raised his arm. Looking as though he wasn't even fully aware he was doing it, Shudo let his left side spark. His flames were beautiful, thawing the frostbite covering the rest of his body until it was nothing but steam rising. "It's your quirk," he said, becoming mildly solemn, because he still did want to win, and he had lined Shudo up like this for a reason. "So give it everything you've got." He pushed off and went for a punch, feinting when Shudo tried to hit him with his flames, and went into a full body tackle. With the power he was using, they burst out of the ice enclosure in a loud explosion that set the audience to screaming, Shudo wincing against the wind as he went sailing to the ground with Izuku on top of him. They collided and he bounced once, long enough for Blackwhip to fly free and wind out to contort around his body. It twisted and pulled, suffocating his fire as Izuku himself rolled in midair, unintentionally moving exactly like Aizawa did when he went in for a capture from above, pulling the main tendril of Blackwhip taut as he slammed Shudo down again with a hand to his head. Yeah. And Midoriya busts out of the ice with a finishing capture move. Say, that looks pretty familiar, Eraserhead. Shudo stared up at him in wonder, the fight in him gone, but he didn't look so angry anymore. He looked like himself, for the first time since Izuku had known him. The festival went fairly quickly after that. The extremely explosive matches were out of the way. Tenya sped Shiozaki out of the ring rather non-violently and Tokoyami easily maneuvered Mina out. Izuku wasn't sure if Ochako was feeling up to the challenge of fighting Kirishima, but even though it appeared he had the upper hand due to his hardening, he knew her quirk was better suited for the match. He was forced to fight her hand-to-hand, after all, as he had no ranged attacks, and all she needed was one touch to send him out of bounds. It was actually rather funny, the way it went down, as she merely smiled and held a defensive stance, waiting for him to charge as he stood there grimacing, smart enough to know what was going on. Finally, he did, and the audience winced as Ochako didn't even try to dodge, letting his punch collide with her gut and startling him badly enough he never saw the slap to his face coming. Then, she floated him out of the ring, while he squawked and flailed, even if she had to do it hunched over, seeing as he'd made her vomit up some saliva. She had actually hit her limit there, however, as she declined her match with Tokoyami after a few hits and he gave her a respectful nod as she left the ring. Izuku got into a speed fight with Tenya, as they both bounced around the ring trying to shove the other out, but he ultimately had the advantage, being able to float, and sent the other boy out of bounds with a gust of wind. Then he fought Tokoyami, and proceeded to spend the entirety of the match at one end of the ring fighting Dark Shadow with Blackwhip, because he figured he may as well show he could do long-range combat too. It ended up lasting quite a while, and even the audience started to get bored, so he activated full cowling and set Tokoyami out of bounds with a strong kick. Everyone started to cheer at that point, and he almost forgot why. The fact that there was no one left to fight hit him like a ton of bricks. The matches were over, everyone was through. And he'd won. He found himself smiling, reuniting with Tokoyami and Ochako, who'd come in third due to the order of the matches, under the stadium, and Midnight directed them onto their pedestals. Nervousness was broiling in his gut as they stood there, waiting to rise up to the arena, able to hear the chanting of the audience, but Ochako smiled at him, abating some of the anxiety. Something about it seemed to say they were going to be just fine. They both still let out simultaneous squeaks when the stage started to rise. Tokoyami let out a noise of amusement, folding his arms, and the sun shone down on them as they rose up, every single face in the stands seeming to look completely new now that he was looking at them from the winner's circle. Look at this, folks. How rare. Almost a whole team from the second exercise made it to the podium. It looks like these listeners chose wisely for their alliance. And then All Might put the first place medal around his neck, and said he was proud of him and that he'd done an excellent job showing the world that he was here. If Izuku almost started crying again when All Might hugged him on live television, neither of his two friends said a word, thankfully. Midnight was doing something on her phone while the cameras were focused on All Might for his short little speech, though, and it made him cringe a bit. Somehow, he just knew it involved him somehow. The sports festival had been held on a Friday. Yui had let out classes for that Saturday, to give them a day to rest, but honestly, it wasn't all that much more tiring than his usual training routine, so Izuku woke up with an extra half hour of sleep and tumbled out of bed for breakfast. His mom had squealed so loudly he worried for his eardrums when he got home the day before. She'd hung his first-place medal in a picture frame in the living room, alongside the pictures she'd taken at his birth, 1st, 3rd, 6th, 9th, and 12th birthday parties, which were usually just them after Bakugo started disliking him, his first day wearing his UA uniform, and his first costume reveal. He thought it was a little much to have out where everyone could see, but then again, they never got visitors, and he didn't want to make her feel bad. "Have fun," she called out as he left the apartment, money for a train ride in his hand. A buzz from his phone alerted him to a text from Ochako. "Just left my house. Hiropak. See you in 20. Momo texted their group mere seconds later. "I shall arrive presently. Please, I assure you it's all right," she was saying about half an hour after. "Honestly, my parents have more money than they know what to do with. Please let me treat you. Wheel. Ochako twiddled her index fingers together, chewing on her lip. Her eyes were lingering on a plant near the food court of the mall they were in, and she clearly wanted to give in, but she denied it already a few times because of her conscience. Izuku knew her parents didn't exactly have a lot of money, however, neither did his mother, so the offer was tempting. I guess it's okay just for today. Just don't get too much, okay? Momo lit up with a smile. The credit card in her fingers as they checked out looked like one of those golden ones with no limits. Izuku also got the feeling she got a little bit of glee out of shopping for them, as she started getting more and more vocal about what she thought looked good when they tried things on, even though they hadn't even come to shop for clothes. Oh, well, he would be satisfied with being her dress-up doll for the day if it made her happy. He really didn't get too excited about anything, however, until they were strolling past a comic store and he saw something in the window that made him JRK to a stop and gasp. What is it? Ochako asked him, curious, doubling back and snorting when she saw what was in the window. It's patterned on All Might's Bronze Age, he exclaimed, pointing at the hoodie inside. Usually clothes are based on his Silver Age or Golden Age, because the designs are more popular, or even his young age, but dash. I'll get it. Momo nearly yelled, too excited to even be embarrassed at her volume, before literally running into the shop to get it before he could ask how much it was. She came back out about 2 minutes later with an eager smile, holding the hoodie in her hands. Here. Izuku beamed. He should have said something like you shouldn't have done that. But his all-might enthusiasm was too overpowering. The other two helped him slip it on over his t-shirt, also all-might themed, and he pulled the hood up to cover his hair. Thanks, Momo. It's my pleasure. You know, seeing all of All Might's costumes makes me think you should change yours up a little, Ochako said as they walked outside, making Izuku raise an eyebrow at her. You know, have a little color variety. Add some white and black. Maybe. I've been thinking about adding a cape. Really? It wouldn't get in the way when you're jumping? Well, it wouldn't be too long, but I was thinking it would make a great emergency wrap, plus if someone was caught in a fire I could use it to avoid smoke dash. I think a cape would look excellent, Momo interrupted, clasping her hands together. Midnight Sensei has been helping me redesign mine, you should also dash. Their conversation continued down a few rabbit trails as they walked. The sidewalk was relatively peaceful and empty, and Ochako eventually took his hand, swinging it back and forth while she smiled. She prompted Momo to take his other hand, which made him turn a little pink, which made them both snicker at him. They'd rounded the corner onto a street that Momo knew a nice ramen restaurant was on when Ochako paused with a gasp. Hey look, see that guy? Capes are totally cool. Izuku followed where she was pointing. A tall, broad young man was walking down the street with a woman with blue skin, dressed in a hero costume with a red cape and a visor. For some reason, he seemed extremely familiar. Oh, I think he might be from Yui, he said, the resemblance clicking. Third year? Oh, that's so cool. Someday we'll be doing work studies too, can you imagine? It was only because Izuku was looking at the pair that he noticed the woman looking up at them and smiling as she spotted them walking hand in hand through the crosswalk. A moment later, however, her face fell, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He twisted his head around. A plain-looking gray car was speeding down the street towards them. It clearly had no intent of stopping, even with 3 teenagers in the way, and he barely had a moment to react. Car, move! He leapt into a tackle, pulling them along with him, and then the fire hydrant near them exploded. Ochako screamed out of surprise. In the few precious seconds it took for them to hit the asphalt and try to scramble away, the car skidded through the crosswalk, brakes squealing as it turned, and he saw the shine of a gun peeking out of the passenger side. It was the reason that water was now cascading into the air and drenching both him and Momo, and seeping onto the ground under Ochako's hands. Ochako, who was closest to the car, and the first in its line of targets. Ochako! He jumped, using full cowling to boost himself, but bullets traveled fast. He meant to grab Ochako and throw her away, but it hit him before he could fully grab her, and his mind instantly went white. He'd felt pain before. He had broken his arm and leg. His fingers, but he'd never gotten shot before. It hurt. A lot. Izuku! Zuku! Izuku. Please wake up, please. Hey god, there's so much blood, Momo. What do I do, Momo? He's bleeding dash. Hey, calm down. He's going to be fine, I promise. What's your name? Ochako. All right, Ochako, help me put pressure on this. It hit his shoulder, but missed his heart, so he'll be fine, all right? Lemillion, did you get those two in the car? Yes, ma'am. They won't be shooting anyone else anytime soon. You there, can you get his phone and call any of his emergency contacts? It's all right, I can call one with mine. Izuku hissed when someone pressed into his shoulder. He blearily opened his eyes, finding a vaguely familiar face looking down at him. The woman with blue hair and skin smiled down at him. Hey, I know this hurts, okay? Just hold still. He turned his head to the side. Something sticky and wet was coating the ground beneath his cheek. Confused, he tried to look around, but she shushed him. Come, keep still. Why is he still bleeding? The woman above him swore lowly. Mirio, did you see that bullet hit something else? I think I saw it ricochet. Then that means it completely tore through him. Sheet.no, don't move him, the ambulance is only a minute out. If we turn him we could cause him to bleed more. Izuku faded out again. Are you awake? You awake? You awake? Am I gonna have to keep asking? Huo. His eyes snapped open. Someone laughed at him, sounding amused, and he squinted. There was a woman sitting across from him, not the one from before, but a woman with dark skin and spiky hair pulled into a bun. That's a new phrase, right? She asked. Ooh. Please stop that, Izuku replied, more out of reflex than anything, a little desperately. She snickered at him. Realizing he wasn't on the street anymore. No, there was nothing around him, they were sitting in a literal void. What the hell? He sat up with a JRK and looked around. Who are you? He asked, perturbed. Name isn't important, she said with a shrug. I'm number 3. She held up 3 fingers, doing little for his confusion, and smiled at him. You've been doing pretty well with the other quirks, so I thought I would give you a little nudge with mine. Have you ever noticed it feels warm when you touch people? Yes? I guess. I mean more than it usually would. Maybe dash. Izuku jerked as his eyes popped open and his hazy vision came back into focus. There was a man with glasses leaning over him, eyes narrowed, and he, too, looked familiar. Call his emergency contact. A voice was saying, maybe the guys, considering his mouth was moving. I'll ride in the ambulance to the hospital with him. Bubble Girl, make sure those villains are squared away dash. And anyway, it's called tactile. The woman kept going even though Izuku was saying back and forth now and not entirely sure where he was again because everything kept getting jumbled around. It was my quirk. You can make others stronger, more attuned with their quirks, or calm them. It is, in pure form, a supplement queer. Midoriya Izuku, can you hear me? You activated it subconsciously. You seemed most inclined towards it, considering your personality, so I was betting on you getting it first, but I guess it's fine you got Nana's, she loves you to death, anyway dash. Midoriya. Are you slipping off again? Geez, kid. Okay, fine, just try to remember you have to touch people to amplify, okay? Man, I hate being a ghost. The last thing Izuku saw was the image of several people standing before him in a line. He was falling, feeling like the invisible floor that had been there had just collapsed, and he reached out to the closest figure in his fear, trying to grab onto a gloved hand that reached for him too. It was a woman with black hair, looking concerned, but then everything dissolved, and he never got to talk to her. He had one last thought before he passed out for real. I want a cape like hers. There was a man sitting beside his bed when he woke up. First, he recognized the boring tile ceiling of a hospital above him, then the steady beep of a heart monitor. It took a minute for his mind to catch up, but he remembered jumping from the car, and then a very intense pain, so he guessed that something must have happened to him. Then he saw the man sitting there, somehow looking formal and rigid even in a sitting down position, frowning at the curtain partition separating them from other beds in the joint room, rhythmically tapping his fingers against his forearm. Then he remembered. The heart monitor started to beep rapidly as he jerked up. He gasped, trying to claw off the breaching mask on his face, which made the man whirl around. "Calm down," he ordered, not sounding irritated but still firm. "You're in the hospital. You don't need to exacerbate your injuries." Nonetheless, he helped get the mask off and Izuku took in a large gulp of air. "Ochako and Momo," he stammered out, vision getting bleary again because of his sudden motion as he tried to look around. "Ochako and Dash? If you mean your two friends who were with you, they are entirely unharmed and in the waiting room." Izuku's body visibly sagged with relief. His eyelids drooped with sudden exhaustion, and he almost pitched over. The man took a hold of his shoulders and tried to guide him back down. It was then Izuku really took notice of him, squinting at his face, and the loopy part of his brain made him smile and start to giggle. He got a raised eyebrow in return. "Is something funny?" "You have green hair," Izuku exclaimed, pointing, which he usually wouldn't have done, since his mother said it was rude. "I never met anyone else with green hair, well, except my mom. It's blonde too though. Like me squared times Toshi." All Might had told him 100 times he could say Toshinori when they were undercover, and Izuku had just gone with a respectful Yagi out of habit, but his drugged-up brain wasn't really thinking linearly. It was the same nickname he used for Hitoshi, which he found hilarious, and he started laughing. 3-3 met number 3-. It was then he realized something, or appeared to, as his smile dropped and his eyes filled with tears. Taken off guard, the man let go of him and frowned. "What's the matter, Dash?" "I'm sorry. I'm so rude. I didn't even ask for your name," Izuku wavered, near crying. "I'm such a bad guest that I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dash." "Fine, young man," the man insisted, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder to get him to stop. "My name is Sasaki Mirai. Please understand that you are on some pain medication right now, and it's likely making you overreact to things that aren't there. You haven't been rude." "Izuku." It was then two teenagers came skidding into their section of the hospital room, still damp shoes squeaking on the tile, and Ochako nearly collided with the end of the bed with a huff. "Izuku, are you okay? Ochako, are you okay?" Izuku slurred instead of answering, making Momo sigh and put a hand to her face in part relief and part consternation. Pouting, Ochako jutted her lower lip out and folded her arms. "Am I okay? You're the one who got hurt. Saving me." "Oh, well, I feel great. I suspect that's because of the painkillers," Momo said with a fond, amused smile. Two other faces peered around the curtain. The man, Mirai, gave them a dry look, but they weren't being obtrusive enough to catch Izuku's attention. What did catch his attention was, a minute later, another form SNG nearly passed them, stopping and skidding on the floor, and then whirling around until Toshinori's eyes landed on him. His expression fell with relief as he panted, clearly having run all the way there, and he rushed over to him. "My boy. Thank goodness you're all right." Izuku's demeanor again took a 180 as he lit up, ignoring everyone else there in favor of the skeletal man who'd just come, almost, crashing in. He opened his arms and lunged, forcing Toshinori to let him hug him and sit down on the edge of the bed or let him eat it on the floor. He let out a jumbled cry somewhere between All Might and Toshinori and Dad. When Izuku thought of Dad, perhaps not of the word itself but of the feelings that people typically associated with a father, two faces came to mind. Aizawa's presence there was firmly rooted. He had proven over and over that Izuku could trust him, that he cared about him, that he would help him with anything. And his sheer admiration for Toshinori had planted a seedling of it a long while ago, cemented by every time the symbol of peace took time out of his busy schedule to play with him on the beach and go for ice cream after. "Thank goodness you're all right," Toshinori sighed, cradling his head and leaning so Izuku wasn't bending forward as far. His hand began to brush through Izuku's hair, over and over, in a way his original fathers never had. Izuku repeated something like "Hi, All Might Nori" that was heavily muffled by Toshinori's suit. Ochako and Momo looked at them with round eyes from the end of the bed. Ochako had slowly lowered herself down, so she was peeking over the rail, looking uncontrollably curious. She leaned closer to Momo and whispered, even though they could all clearly hear her. "That must be his dad." Toshinori jumped and nearly coughed up blood. That is a young dash. A nurse peered around the corner and cleared her throat pointedly. Most of them jumped, almost guiltily, and Mirai merely sighed and adjusted his glasses. I'm afraid you're all going to have to wait in the waiting area, as we're only allowing emergency contacts at this time. Bubble Girl, Lemillion, let's go, Mirai said at once, standing up with a professional air about him and straightening his suit sleeves. Two sheepish faces met his, and the two heroes? Or were they both students? Backed away. Izuku vaguely caught the curiousness on the face of the young man. Ochako and Momo backed up a few steps to follow them. My boy, do you mind if I leave just for a minute, to talk to Sir Night-Eye? Toshinori asked him, patting his hair one more time and gently setting him down on the pillows. I just need to confirm what happened. Young Yaoyorozu was a bit vague in her panic, understandably. Okay, Izuku said, then proceeded to only let go with one arm and use it to grab onto one of Toshinori's long-hanging bangs. Izuku, come now please dash. Several snickers made Toshinori's face heat up as they abandoned him to extricate himself on his own from Izuku, who didn't seem to understand why he couldn't both hang onto Toshinori's hair and let him go into the other room at the same time. After an awkward, vaguely stilted conversation with Night-Eye concerning the details of the incident, they stood in an even more awkward silence, not meeting each other's eyes, which was interrupted by Aizawa storming in out of nowhere after speaking to his two unharmed students and scaring the crap out of All Might. Toshinori took it as an excuse to clear his throat, adjust his collar, and say he would try and contact Night-Eye later before leading Aizawa back. He strategically let the other man walk in first so he would be first victim to Izuku's painkiller-induced affection overload, which was a success, as the boy immediately trapped him in a hug, nearly dragging him onto the bed. Am I gonna have a cool scar? Most likely. Am I gonna have to miss school on Monday? Probably not once Recovery Girl gets here. But can I have rainbow band-aids? You're going to need more than a band-aid. Do I have stitches? Yes. Have you ever had stitches? Yes, I have. Toshinori made the mistake of letting out a quiet bubble of laughter. Aizawa glared at him. Izuku, who still had an iron grip on his shirt, looked up at him with a grin. You're my favorite teacher, Aizawa-sensei. The man's eyebrow shot up. Oh, am I? He sent a teasing smirk to Toshinori, who snorted and smiled, unoffended. Izuku's grin became a fraction more loopy. He certainly wasn't so talkative otherwise. You always listen to me and keep Kakin from yelling at me, and you're super cool, and you never even hit me. He chirped it out like it was merely a list of positive qualities. Aizawa froze, eyes flickering up to Toshinori, but the other man just frowned in reply to signify he hadn't heard anything about that detail. Have teachers hit you before? Only like twice, Izuku muttered, having sunk farther into the mattress, obviously falling into sleep. Toshinori's previous light mood had evaporated, and now he only felt a tenseness in his gut that wasn't from running over from Yui. Something about the information obviously annoyed Aizawa, more than it did normally, and Toshinori almost opened his mouth to ask, "Is there something else you know?" But he didn't get the chance, as Izuku jerked back up with another blinding smile and crowed out, "Yeah." And I. His eyelids drooped and he yawned. "I have another quirk." The two teachers both froze, and then he fell asleep again, leaving them with that too. Stew with. Izuku thought he was doing well, all things considered. He'd gotten shot, and it would have been pretty serious if the hospital didn't have a surgeon with a mild healing quirk and Recovery Girl hadn't come all that way to help him. He felt pretty good on Monday, however, even if he still had to wear bandages over his stitches. He got to class early as usual. Tenya, Momo, and Ochako all liked to get there about 15 minutes before homeroom started, so they could all talk. The mood felt downtrodden when he entered, however, and he surveyed Tenya with a frown. "Tenya? Are you all right?" Tenya's head jerked up. He mustered a smile, getting up to hurry over to him. "Midoriya. I am fine. I just thought I just received some unhappy news on Friday. My brother was injured. But that's not important right now. I heard of your heroism this weekend. How are you feeling?" Izuku settled into his usual spot. Momo pulled a new hoodie out of her backpack, offering it to him with a smile, since his other one had gotten ruined via a bullet, and Ochako chattered on about how selfless and cool he had been for several minutes while a few other students streamed in. Tsuyu and Mina both offered him hugs, and Toru sounded like she was almost crying when she gingerly embraced him. Kirishima trotted inside and crowed out that he was so manly, saving Ochako, and a congratulations for winning the sports festival, which many of the others repeated. Tokoyami settled in the seat behind him while Dark Shadow slithered over and crooned in his ear, worrying over him like a mother hen, and he patted it on the head to try and appease it. Shudo came in quieter than usual, somehow. His eyes landed on Izuku, and he hesitated, visibly, before slowly walking over to the empty seat beside him. The rest of his friends had left it empty on purpose, after all. Midoriya, he greeted, sliding into the seat like it might burn him. I heard you got hurt on Saturday. Are you all right? I'm fine, and you can call me Izuku. Izuku returned brightly, smiling. Very well. The other boy paused, then slowly averted his eyes. You can call me Shudo as well then. Thank you. A slam from the door alerted them to the fact Aizawa had entered. They all jumped to attention, and Izuku noticed that Bakugo was pointedly ignoring looking in his direction, much quieter than usual. Looking more tired than ever, probably because he'd gotten hit with the full force of a crying, panicked Inko at the hospital 2 days ago. Aizawa gave them all a dull stare and inclined his head slightly at the boy standing beside him. Immediately, Izuku perked up in excitement. This is Shinso. He'll be filling Minetta's old spot in our class. Don't be rude. Hey, awesome man. How manly. Welcome. Are you the guy with the voice quirk? Oh, how cool. Like Mike-sensei. Oh, that's Midoriya's friend. The chattering quieted down when Aizawa glared at them. Looking bored, Hitoshi strolled over to the seat on Izuku's other side, casting Shudo a I told you so smirk as he went. You can all get acquainted later, Aizawa continued. For today, as I'm sure you're aware, we have some things to discuss. Many of you received internship offers due to your performance at the sports festival. On your desks you'll find a list of pros who requested you, and if you didn't receive any, a list of agencies willing to take on any students who need an internship. These internships will take place for the entirety of next week, and will involve working with pros out in the field in real situations. So, in preparation for that, you'll need updated costumes and a name to go by. I'm no good at that, so Midnight will handle this part of the lesson. Izuku had to cough to muffle a laugh as Aizawa zipped himself into his sleeping bag and left his colleague to do all the work. This is kind of sudden, Hitoshi muttered, staring his miniature whiteboard and leaning into one palm. Hey, you're gonna be a hero student. By the way, come up with your hero name and costume right now. Don't worry, Shinso. Ochako tried to encourage him, twisting around in her chair to give him an encouraging look. We can help. Maybe something to do with your quirk. I really don't want to overtly advertise the fact that I can brainwash people. What about you, Shudo? Izuku asked, turning to look at the boy. I don't know. I'll probably just use my name. Todoroki. You can't just use your name, Momo huffed, sounding a bit exasperated. That's too obvious. Izuku turned to look at his own whiteboard. He did have an idea, but he wasn't sure if it was stupid or not. Plus, Aizawa-sensei had been eyeing him from his sleeping corner when he thought Izuku wouldn't notice, so he was a bit nervous as to whether something had happened or not. What's yours, Izuku? He yelped when Ochako swiped his board. Hey! She glanced at it and beamed. Oh, this is perfect. The support hero, versatile. You can do a lot with your quirk, can't you? Izuku's face flushed. He looked away, rubbing the back of his head. Yet I even found another way I can use it this weekend too. I can transfer the energy I use into someone else, to amplify their quirk. That's even more perfect. Todoroki, how about something like the element hero or freezer burn or frostbite? Shudo shrugged. Frostfire. Izuku suggested. He shrugged again, and wrote it down on his board. He tried to lean over as subtly as he could to read it, though he got the feeling Shudo noticed anyway. The elemental hero, Frostfire. Well, Midnight Sensei said they weren't permanent, anyway, Ochako continued. Izuku eyed Tenya, who hadn't said much, simply staring at his board for most of the time, and frowned. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught Hitoshi scribbling on his board. Curious, he raised an eyebrow and leaned over. The other boy immediately covered it with his hand and gave him a dry look, causing him to pout. "Come on, I want to see." Sighing, mostly for show, Hitoshi moved his hand. "Persona, Mindjack hero. I like it, but I thought you said you didn't want to allude to your quirk?" Hitoshi shrugged, not answering. "Did Mike-sensei suggest it?" Hitoshi's ears turned pink. Izuku snickered to himself, making them go even redder, and ducked before Hitoshi could swat him with his board. Izuku also noticed Aizawa looking at Hitoshi sideways every once in a while. His brain gears were turning, but they weren't coming up with much, and he found himself wondering at what was on their sensei's mind. Ingenious. But there wasn't much he could do sitting in class. He decided to flip over the pages, showing his internship offers, and nearly screamed. 5,457 offers. Well, at least he had options. Izuku could hardly contain his excitement. He had been overwhelmed by just how many heroes were interested in him, but at the top of the list was a name he hadn't been expecting to see: Hawks. As in number 3, flying, impeccable record Hawks. Someone who could help him with his flying, not to mention land him in the public eye. Not that he particularly wanted to be in the public eye, but he knew it was a good thing for getting opportunities. "Guys," he whispered, twisting around in his seat to look at his friends behind him. The teachers had let them gather in groups again, and his usual circle was huddled around their usual area of the room, where they hogged access to the class bulletin board and whiteboard. Tsu had drawn a couple of frogs on the whiteboard, while Ochako kept decorating the bulletin with various pink and yellow stickers. "I think I know who I want to intern with." "Already?" Tako asked, curious. "Yeah. Hawk sent me an offer. The number 3rd hero." Tokoyami looked up in surprise. "You received an offer from Hawks, Midori?" "I did as well. Perhaps we can intern together." "Yeah. That would be great." Shudo paused visibly. His eyes wandered from Izuku to his own stack of papers, and he hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I had also received an offer from Hawks. I was thinking of interning with Weld, but perhaps he would be a better choice." A better choice translated to a choice with friends, but he wouldn't admit that out loud. "Go with Hawks, maybe we can all work together." Izuku encouraged, excited. He didn't want Shudo spending more time around Endeavor than necessary, especially since his plans to get the man arrested weren't in place yet. Honestly, what kind of person put his own children through such hellish training just for his own vendetta? "What about you, Oka?" "Oh, well." Ochako glanced down at her paper and chewed her lip. She had gotten way more offers than she expected, but she had taken one of her pink highlighters and highlighted all the ones that were combat-oriented. "I was thinking about Miruko? The rabbit hero and number 6. "Of course I do. She sent you an offer?" "Why, she's really, intimidating, you know? And I really want to get better at fighting, so." "That's a great idea, Ochako." Momo chimed in, smiling. Both Ochako and Izuku gave her a curious glance, silently asking who she was interning with. "Well, I was actually thinking of interning with Midnight Sensei. I know it's a bit unconventional, interning with a teacher, but, well." She trailed off, embarrassed. Izuku knew what she meant. Midnight had been giving her extra help to redesign her costume, because though their quirks weren't similar, the limitations were. Both relied on how much skin they were showing to work. Midnight had sent the formula for her costume material to Power Loader and May to help get Momo a costume that was easier to move around in and covered a bit more, for Momo's comfort. With the easily tearable material, she could still access more skin to create large things, without having to run around whilst being freezing all the time when they trained in exercises with Shudo. "That's a good idea. I think she'd have a lot to teach you. Plus she's well versed in hand-to-hand combat too, since her quirk isn't inherently offensive." A more relaxed smile overtook Momo's face. "That is what I was thinking. In addition, I believe she patrols in the same area of city as Death Arms, so." She trailed off for a second time, eyes drifting over to where Kyuka sat talking with Toru, Shoji and Koda. A snicker left Izuku's mouth. Ochako bit down on a smile, making Momo's face heat up, and she stammered for an excuse. Well, that is dash. You just want to be near Jairu, don't you, Momo? Ochako asked through a giggle, making Momo's blush worsen. Oh, of course not, I just. Momo and Q, sittin' in a tree, Ketsundash, Ochako began to sang, yelping when Momo slapped a hand over her mouth with a lackluster glare. She grinned sheepishly. She opened her mouth again when Momo lowered her hand. It's fine, Momo, really. I mean, to have a crush, you know? I mean, I kind of hope I see Tsu sometime next week. She twiddled her thumbs, gaze settling on Tsu, who sat beside Koda, and a distracted smile appeared on her face. Izuku decided to take pity on them and change the subject. He looked over at Tenya, who sat further away than usual staring at the clock. Tenya, what about you? The other boy jumped like he'd been shocked. Oh, I'm sorry, Midoriya. I was probably going to go with Manuel. I think he'd be excellent to learn from. Even while he replied, his eyes looked a bit distant, and Izuku had to stop himself from gnawing on his lip in worry. He usually fell back on saying Midoriya when he was distracted or nervous, too. He looked over at Hitoshi, who had his head leaning on his arms as he slumped onto his desk. Toshi? What about you? The boy shrugged. I didn't get any, since I was Gen Ed at the time, but I think I'll go with Present Mike, since he takes students who don't get scouted. Izuku's smile turned into something more like a smirk. Ah, really? That's sweet. You must really like him, huh? He had to admit, he took great pleasure in embarrassing his friend and watching his face turn red. Hitoshi averted his eyes, glaring at the doorway. He's just cool. That's all. And he has a voice quirk and can help me with my speaker. It definitely had nothing to do with the fact that he always got excited when he got his English papers back, or preened like a peacock when Yamada praised him, or the time Mike-sensei had ruffled his hair, Izuku thought. Honestly, Hitoshi was starting to be just as transparent with Present Mike as he was with Eraserhead. He seemed to look up to them like they were the only fatherly figures he'd ever had. That well, he'd actually never said anything about his parents, so maybe that was accurate. Well, I'm sure it'll all go well. Shudo, I can add you to our group chat so we can all talk. Uraraka, Midoriya, please stay after class. I have some notes on your homework. Ochako had been vaguely confused when their sensei asked them to stay. Izuku looked just as perturbed as she did, because she was pretty sure Aizawa-sensei hadn't graded the homework from Friday yet. She loved him, but after the sports festival on one day and a student getting shot on the next, she doubted he had done much grading, which meant he had something else to say. He motioned for Izuku to wait outside, which meant he wanted to talk to her first, which made a seed of anxiety blossom in her gut. Was this about the shooting? You can relax, Uraraka, he said when he saw how nervous she was, leaning against the podium with his hands in his pockets. You aren't in trouble. I just had a question. A tiny bit of the tension in her shoulders relaxed. She adjusted the straps of her backpack and stopped herself chewing on her lip. What is it, sensei? I've noticed you've seemed irritated with Bakugo today. Just like that, the tension was back, and she felt her face flood with heat. Want to tell me why? And, well, that she really couldn't deny it. She'd glared at him when she came in, and made sure to seat herself between him and Izuku even if they were on separate sides of the room anyway, and glared at him when he went up to pick a hero name, and generally acted like she didn't like him. Because she didn't. You defeated him in the sparring matches. Did something he said upset you? No, she bit out, trying not to sound rude but some of her irritation slipping out anyway. It wasn't what he said to me. It's what he says to Izuku. He's a bully, sensei. Or at least he used to be. Haven't you noticed? She looked up at him imploringly, but looking him in the eyes seemed to drain some of her courage, and she looked away again, embarrassed. He only ever yells at him and Izuku always gets nervous around him. I mean, you had to keep him from hitting him on our first day. And on the obstacle course, he kept screaming at him and everything, and Izuku always flinches when he shouts and Bakugo calls him that insulting nickname, and it's just so obvious. They aren't childhood friends. Izuku is scared of him and Bakugo doesn't even like him. She knew she sounded upset. Still, she was surprised when a hand landed on her shoulder and made her look up to find her teacher kneeling in front of her, a concerned frown on his face. I have noticed that their dynamic isn't one that involves friendship, he said, measured and careful, and I was planning on asking him about it. I'm sorry if you thought I was ignoring it. Ochako deflated, looking back at the floor and trying not to let her lip tremble like it always did when she got too upset. Has Midoriya talked to you about it? And no, but he knew I beat Bakugo for him at the festival because I just couldn't stand to see him fight him, and he came to thank me after, and he cried a lot and I always try and hold his hand or stand between them when Bakugo yells, and he thanked me. I see. I'm sorry if you felt like you couldn't bring this up to me. I'm going to talk to them both, Aizawa assured her, and something deep down felt relieved because he actually sounded like he cared. I'm going to make sure Bakugo makes some changes to his behavior, and Midoriya doesn't have to deal with him. Try and do me a favor and try not to hold on to being angry. I know you have good reason, but it won't work out in the long run. You should be able to get along with your classmates and enjoy your time here without worrying about someone else. Ochako bit into her lip. Yes, sensei, she muttered quiet. Do you want me to send Izuku in now? Yes. She flinched out of surprise when his hand landed lightly on her head, giving it a pat. One last thing. I'm proud of you. You deserved that win. Don't ever doubt that. Despite her sour mood, she found herself smiling. Something light and happy had replaced the dour feeling in her chest, and she looked up to beam at him. Yes, sensei. Thank you. Izuku didn't really know what to expect. Ochako had come out of the classroom looking happy enough, but she'd also looked a little regretful when she smiled at him before heading out. Aizawa-sensei was standing at the front of class, posed casual when he walked in, but he did look more tired than usual. He nodded for Izuku to sit down. Anxiously, he slid into a seat at the front. He couldn't remember who had been sitting there during class. Toru maybe? His teacher's voice broke him out of his string of worried thoughts. Midoriya, is your wound healing all right? It's fine, sensei, he replied, eyes flitting around the room. Am I in trouble? Aizawa sighed. He sounded exhausted, but then again he always did, to a degree. No. I need to discuss something with you. While you were sedated at the hospital, you told me something that was cause for some concern. Confused, Izuku stared at him, and his stomach dropped at his next words. You told me previous teachers had hit you. No. Why had he gone and done that? How had he messed up? Izuku had just wanted to leave his earlier years at school behind, not dredge them up. Did I? Well, I must have been mistaken. You know how loopy hospital meds can make you dash, he said with a nervous laugh, stopping when Aizawa gave him a dry look. I can tell when you're trying to lie, Midoriya. I promise you that you can talk to me about this. I told you I would believe you, didn't I? Izuku looked away from his unflinching stare. I know that, sensei, he whispered, fiddling with the charm bracelet around his wrist that Ochako had bought for him. It was from a build-it-yourself kit, one of a few she'd given to him, Momo and Tsu, with the same base design but special charms for each of them and a pink star on all of them. I know that you'll believe me, I just don't want to bring up things in the past. There was a rustle of cloth as Aizawa knelt in front of the desk. He reached out and placed a hand on Izuku's wrist, with hardly any pressure, light enough he could pull away if he wanted. I know that. But if someone at your old school mistreated you, then they could mistreat someone else. A pang of guilt coursed through him that he tried to ignore. But more than that, you deserve justice. Whatever happened to you, it wasn't right. I've been thinking about this longer than since Saturday, Midoriya. Startled, Izuku glanced up at him, and his stomach flipped at the way his teacher's eyes had gone narrow. I've noticed your behavior. How hard it is for you to trust. You don't deserve to feel that way. You were, and are still, a child. You deserve safety and security. I can't force you to tell me anything, but I also can't not be concerned about this. Not just as your teacher, but as a pro that's supposed to uphold the law. Izuku examined a particularly interesting piece of paint. Chipping on the far wall. Hesitantly, he let a tiny bit of his guard down. Aizawa-sensei. Well, believe me. I just wanted to forget it all. I know. I don't want to make you relive it, but if there's something I can do, I need to do it. And I know that Bakugo had something to do with all this. Izuku looked up at him in a panic. You can't expel him, he blurted out, which made a furrow appear in Aizawa's brow, because it confirmed something worse than he was even suspecting was going on. I mean, you can't I don't want dash. Midoriya, calm down. I won't expel him, all right? Depending on just what he'd done, that is. Aizawa knew his other student had, to put it mildly, behavioral issues, but he had been hoping it would, and to some extent, had seen it mellow out as the semester progressed. He still had obvious anger issues, but he'd started to be friendlier with a few students, Kirishima specifically. But he still had extreme reactions to Midoriya, and that was a problem. What did he do? Midoriya ducked his head, something like shame in the way he held himself. It again gave Aizawa a bad feeling. He bullied me, the boy finally mumbled out, sounding like he regretted making the confession as he did it. For a long time. The last day of junior high, he'd said to jump off the roof, so I might be reborn with a quirk to be a hero, but he's different now. I mean, he still hates me, but dash, he looked up, pressing his lips together, and his eyes strayed to the door again. But he likes Kirishima and some of the others, and he isn't entirely the same. I want him to be able to get better, and I don't want to ruin his dreams. Shuta's first instinct was to feel a blinding white-hot flash of anger. Considering it all, things made sense now. Bakugo, with his ego, thinking Midoriya was quirkless, hated him when he found out he got into Yui, hated that he surpassed him in progress, hated that he was suddenly achieving things Bakugo was not. However, even if his knee-jerk reaction was protective, with good reason, they were both his students now, and he had a duty to both, so he had to retain some element of calm and neutrality to deal with the situation properly. Bakugo needed to face consequences, that was certain, but Aizawa didn't think he was too far gone, not yet. He could still rein the boy in and make a hero out of him, a proper one. And it wasn't entirely his fault. I mean, he was a kid too, you know? It's the teachers, they just let him do whatever he wanted for years, and never chastised him, or punished him. There were no rules, or consequences, or anything. Please, sensei, don't expel him. Aizawa sighed. He put a hand on the boy's head, ruffling his hair. I won't, kid. But you have to understand that I need to investigate this, and Bakugo will have to change his behavior if he wants to stay in this course, let alone my classroom. It's one thing to let him stay, but after that, you have no influence. It's all up to him and the choices he makes. If he can't work with others, he has no future here. Izuku bit his lip, somehow still feeling guilty, and Aizawa hated it. He really had gotten the class with issues this year, hadn't he? Do you think you can tell me about this with the guidance counselor? Yeah, I think so. Aizawa ruffled his hair again. He stood up, offering his hand on reflex, and might have felt briefly embarrassed if Midoriya didn't take it so quickly, obviously glad just to have something to hold on to. They walked to the counseling services office, and after years of silence, Izuku finally talked about so many of the things that had given him nightmares since he was a child. He might have cried some, and had to take a break in the middle of it and still felt guilty, but part of him felt good, finally felt relieved, finally felt relaxed. Because people believed him, and told him it wasn't his fault, and finally, he got to mourn the loss of his first friend instead of bottling it up inside. Aizawa-sensei will believe me, will help me. Hitoshi hadn't really been expecting anything bad to happen when he went home. It was just another day, wasn't it? His current foster family wasn't that bad. They didn't really pay attention to him, or do normal parent things, but they didn't bother him either. Sure, they never asked how his day went, or welcomed him home, or congratulated him on a good grade, or that much else, but they left him to his own devices, so that was fine. He did try and keep out of their way because both his foster father and mother got annoyed very easily, and he knew how easy it was to step on the wrong toe and incite someone's temper. Isoko, his father, worked at a legal firm, doing all the tedious, time-consuming work no one else wanted, and Aomi, his mother, spent all day in a restaurant taking orders, so they were both exhausted and typically irritated when they got home. Nothing too majorly bad had happened in the 2 years he'd been there, mostly because he knew how to keep his mouth shut and stick to his own devices, so he figured he could stick it out until he turned 18. Then he got home and began unloading groceries from Aomi's car when she called over to him to help, sounding tired and annoyed, and accidentally dropped the bag holding the eggs. "God damn it," she groaned, reaching out as she veered close and smacking him over the head, the sharp part of her ring scraping into his cheek just a bit. "BFNG careful. God, now I have to go buy more eggs. More FING milk, probably too, and F dash. Can you go and at least wipe yourself off? Use your brain for once, kid." Feeling a bit numb, Hitoshi reached up and wiped at his face. It wasn't a lot of blood, but he only succeeded in smearing it across his cheekbone, making her scowl deepen. He always did something, didn't he? Every home he messed it up or things like this happened or both. Yet he couldn't help but sigh, too used to it to really care, ducking his head as he turned to go inside. "Excuse me, Mrs. Yamane." It was a familiar tone, one he'd heard before, and he froze. He looked up, only moving his eyes, and his heart sunk when he saw a woman standing there. She wasn't familiar, but her posture, her demeanor, her stale smile was. "Yes," Aomi bit out, frowning. "What?" "My name is Ms. Tsukuda. I work with child welfare." Aomi tensed as the woman smiled blandly at her, a phone in her hand. "I was here for a visit with young Shinso here." "But we haven't had a visit in over a year," Aomi stammered, clearly taken off guard. Hitoshi kind of wanted to ram his head into a wall. It was just one time, just one slip-up, just one. "I'll make note of that. I'd like to start with a talk with Hitoshi here. On our own." And that was how he ended up sitting in the school's counseling office, slumped against the wall across from Izuku, because apparently Tsukuda was just as unimpressed with his bare room and mildly underweight BMI as she was with seeing his foster slap him, and instead of going to an orphanage facility, he was now at school, because 2 teachers and the principal had filed a complaint for concern and gotten a social worker with a license for underground work to check on him. And now he was a ward of the school, which was better than not getting to go to school, but he still wanted to sink into the floor and go to sleep for a while. His eyes flicked up to where Izuku sat. "So," he began in a drawl, trying not to think of his current, humiliating circumstances, "what are you in for?" Izuku gave him a teary smile. He'd obviously been crying at some point. He gave a half-hearted shrug. "Things my old school did. Bullying and Bakugo and sheet? Yeah. Color me surprised. Are you okay?" "I dunno." There was a bright pink band-aid on his face Tsukuda had given him. He didn't know what he was going to do. The door swung open. At first, Hitoshi didn't recognize who was standing there, and he felt his brow furrow in confusion, but when the man opened his mouth it became obvious. "Hello there, little listeners. Feeling a little down today, are we?" "Mike-sensei?" Izuku asked, surprised. "Is that you?" The man let out an amused laugh. "Of course it's me. Is it the hair? Let me tell ya, it takes so long to style it that way every morning." He stepped inside and leaned down, ruffling both their mops of hair. "I'll be right back. Gotta talk to the boring adults for a minute," he said with a wink, then jogged through the waiting room to Hound Dog's office. The door had a glass window in it, and they both could see Aizawa standing there, with his "I'm not in the mood today" grim scowl on. Tsukuda, Nedzu, one of the other counselors, recovery girl, and a civilian representative from Hitoshi's former orphanage had all streamed in over the course of the hour, leaving them to wonder at what was going on. Hitoshi just shrugged when Izuku glanced at him. He watched Present Mike step inside, pull the door shut behind him, and walk over to Eraserhead, planting a quick kiss on the man's cheek before he turned to where he knew the desk was to address Nedzu. He'd accidentally let slip one day, in class, when a girl kept prodding him, that he liked boys instead of girls, and he'd frozen up, not sure of what to do, and Mike had interrupted them with a laugh and something to say about the short story they were reading and a wink to Hitoshi. He'd gotten the feeling Mike-sensei was like him, too, but he wasn't sure, but he supposed he could be now. It would be nice to live with them. Stupid thoughts. Things never went his way, and he supposed he would just rotate around to different chaperones until another mildly crappy foster was found. The door opened again, startling him. It was a woman who was clearly Izuku's mother, this time. She zipped over to her son and wrapped her arms around him with a concerned look on her face, practically cooing. "Oh, Izuku, are you okay? When Aizawa-sensei called me and told me, oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, is this your friend?" "Yeah, this is Hitoshi." "Nice to meet you," the woman greeted him, warmly, as she took his hand and shook it gently. Hitoshi flushed a little, nodding in reply, and she turned to look at the door. "I'll be right back, Izuku. We'll get this sorted out, all right?" Izuku nodded wordlessly. Then his mother entered the office, and they were left sitting there in awkward silence again, and Hitoshi sighed. As usual, he guessed,